Forward. Some people are born to be heroes. Some people earn it through years of trying. Allow me to introduce you to 3 likely lads who had heroism strangely dropped on their heads. Please enjoy the first adventures of Nicholas, Nick, Godfrey, Stuart, Stu, Wilson, and Peter Harris, Spock. 3. Unattached, English, horny, mid-30-year-old lads on holiday. As they almost battle against evil forces, almost rescue damsels in distress and almost save a country from total destruction. They definitely do, however, drink copious amounts of amber fluid and have lots of horizontal fun. The story is set mostly in the amazing city of Pattaya, located on the eastern seaboard of Thailand. Lush green palm trees, crystal clear waters, warm golden sand and herds of buffalo wandering aimlessly over grassy meadows, you won't find there, however, chrome pole molesters, go-go dancers, ogling dens, cheap, amber fluid and beautiful, accommodating women more than make up for it. Follow their hilarious antics through the many stages of intoxication, from juice through spannered and shitfaced up to the ultimate stage of being total wankered, as they unknowingly enter into a chase between good and evil for the recovery of an ancient holy relic. Enter into a diverse culture of Southeast Asian people whose attitudes, traditions, and lives have, and always will, remain a mystery to the Western world. So, unless you like stories about buffaloes, please read on and enjoy Siam Storm, an absolute must-read survival guide for anyone traveling to the land of smiles. 3. Korp kun krap. Thank you. Moreover, if you want something to do after reading this epic, think about this puzzle. A man and woman marry and have a baby boy. 1 year later, they have another baby boy, but the 2 boys are not brothers. Why? If you are stumped, the answer is revealed in chapter 21. 4. Prologue. The ancient stage is set. The delicate scent of jasmine, lotus blossom and other oriental fragrances drift soothingly through the warm candlelit main hall of the Wat, the temple. Inside are highly trained Chang, elephant warrior monks of the Tinju order, kneeling with their foreheads touching the marble floor, arms extended in front of them. They are deep in meditation and await the moment, like crouching lions waiting for the scent of their prey. Situated in dense jungle and surrounded by jungle-encased mountains, this Wat was said to be around 2,000 years old and built by monks in Salaburi, which was a remote village, just a short distance away from the small southeastern Thai/Cambodian border town of Pongnam Ram. The Wat was small by temple standards, with gleaming domes and arches covered in gold leaf, and it had skillful white-carved statues that depicted Buddha's journey through life, both as a prince and a pauper. The Wat was built against a mountain to the rear of the village. The meticulously maintained Wat had a large door at the front, a small door at the rear, and a door at the side leading to a meditation room. The exterior of this small, windowless room had mosaic tiles formed into murals that depicted a nobleman on a horse, smiling down upon a poor, decrepit individual. It was believed this was the moment when Prince Siddhartha Gautama decided to give up his earthly possessions and begin his journey to enlightenment, eventual by becoming known as Buddha and entering nirvana, heaven, whilst still alive. 5. Inside the meditation room was an embalmed corpse laid out on a stone slab, a foetus in a glass jar, preserved in a clear liquid made from the bark of a local tree, and a skeleton. The monks entered this room for intense meditation on the journey through life and to reflect on birth, death, and the afterlife. Cut into one wall was an entrance with a small tunnel, which led to a large cave, and a heavy golden gate that covered the cave's mouth. One hooded monk stood guard on either side of the gate. Each carried a small bow and quiver filled with menacing arrows. The handles of their sheathed swords sparkled, even through the dim light. This cave housed the teachings of the Lord Buddha and the what's most valuable possession, 4 premolars, wisdom teeth of the Holy Buddha, kept in a golden box, about the size of a matchbox and adorned with rubies and sapphires from the nearby mines of Chantaburi. The inner chamber of the main temple was basic, with large, smooth marble pillars set on either side of a 3-meter wide aisle. Small mats were placed on the marble floor to the side of the aisle for the monks to pray, receive teachings, and meditate. Outside the main temple was the monks' living quarters and large arenas where they would learn fighting skills, both with and without weapons. Although the weapons were ancient, in trained Tinju hands they proved to be as deadly as any modern-day weapon. Handed down from generation to generation, the monks' skill as great warriors, in all forms of combat were legendary. The early kings of Siam, which has been known as Thailand since May 11, 1949, used Tinju monks as bodyguards and assassins throughout the centuries. Due to inhospitable terrain, humidity, and many biting insects, the approach to the village was difficult. With no roads or visible tracks, the only people with the knowledge to find their way were the villagers and monks. Through this anonymity, the village and what remained unhindered for millennia, using 6. knowledge passed down through the ages, they farmed the land, tended their cattle, and survived on medicines provided by the many trees and plants found in the surrounding forest. They were totally self-sufficient and had no need for the trappings or indulgences of the outside world that had long since forgotten them. The monks, all males, were chosen before birth. When a Tinju monk died, the next firstborn son of a villager became his replacement. It was believed that he was the reincarnation of the deceased Tinju. At just 1 day old, the infant was taken to the temple. There he would remain for the rest of his life, never knowing his real parents or family. The infant would be taken care of, taught, and nurtured by the other monks. For the boy's family it was a great honor to have a son who was Tinju, because they were known for their great wisdom and kindness in their search for enlightenment. They were born Tinju and died Tinju. There were currently 75 monks. The youngest was 2 years old, and the eldest was 86. For the monks of the Tinju order, it was their credo to guard the sacred relic. Active duty started at the age of 10, and continued throughout their lives until they were around 70 years old. They retired from active service and, except for the Prime Master, lived the remainder of their lives as elder monks, undertaking teaching and guidance for the young monks. A Siamese trader and emissary to the king, acquired the holy remnants of Prince Siddhartha Gautama over 500 years after his death, about the same time Christ was born. At the time, it was widely believed that any ruler who worshipped the relics of Buddha would be given the power to command and rule wisely. The trader brought the relics to Siam from China. After searching for 20 years, but he was well rewarded for his endeavor. They were presented to King Bumnalankorn of Siam. 7. Who had a golden box encrusted with locally mined rubies and sapphires made to house the relics. In order to keep them safe, he needed the most highly trained Chang, elephant warriors from the kingdom to guard them with their lives. After many months of fierce gladiatorial competitions, 50 of the country's best warriors were chosen, along with 25 of the holiest Buddhist teachers. With their hair and eyebrows shaved, and bedecked in the traditional bright orange robes with the addition of a red sash, the Tinja monks were created. Their role was to guard the holy relics and every year, on the king's birthday, to escort the relic to the imperial palace so that the king could ask for continued wisdom to rule. The king chose a site in the heart of a jungle. He named it Salaburi and brought in artisans from all over the kingdom to build the wat. Taking 12 years to construct, it was built next to a cave in one of the nearby mountain and was made secure with gates and booby traps. The boxed relics were then placed into a small gold statue of Buddha. The key was given to one holy man, who was then given the title Prime Master. Only he knew the booby traps, and only he could hold the key. People from all over the kingdom, families of builders, carpenters, teachers, doctors and farmers, were selected and came in to take care of the new monks and made up the population of Salaburi village. A new civilization was created, cut off from the outside world, and it developed with its own culture. Apart from the king, his chief of the palace guards, the head of the asterisk temple of the Emerald Buddha at the imperial palace, and the Tinju, nobody else is aware of the existence of the holy relic. The chief of the palace guards had the responsibility of transporting the Tinju to and from the palace. Large army transports would be driven to Pongnam Ram. The monks would be waiting, and get into the vehicles, and proceed to the imperial palace in Bangkok. The monks would then 8. Disembark and enter the temple of the Emerald Buddha, forming rows on either side of the aisle. The Prime Master would walk over to the Emerald Buddha, remove the golden box from his robe, and place it at the foot of the Buddha. He would then pray alone for several moments, before joining the other monks to await the king's arrival. In Salaburi, 2 hooded monks guarded the remnants 24 hours a day. The relics were only removed prior to the current monarch's birthday, in time to transport them to the imperial palace. When the imperial palace was located in the former capital of Chiang Mai, the journey took weeks. After its relocation to Bangkok, it still took several days before the introduction of motor vehicles. Now the journey was only a 5-hour drive. The monks removed the relics the day before in order to perform their own ritual at their Salaburi Wat, the ceremony of the Great Journey. This was the greatest day in the monks' year, as it meant the next day they would be going to the imperial palace and meeting their beloved monarch, King Bhumipal Adulyadej the Great of the Chukri house, whose birthday fell on the 5th of December. Kunsam Cha had been Prime Master of the Tinja for 4 years. Now 58 years of age, he had the strength of a lion and the speed of a striking snake. His mentor, the former Prime Master Kunvichi, had handed over the honor to Samcha, after losing his sight and being unable to perform his duties. Within the Tinja society, monks ranked in order from novice, to warrior, to master, with only one nominated as Prime Master. Although Samcha was not the eldest master, his merit and courage had convinced his peers that he was the right man for the job. Samcha now stood in front of the large golden statue of Buddha, situated at the rear of the Tinja temple. The statue, approximately 20 tall, was of the Buddha sitting in a cross-legged lotus position with open hands and smiling face as he 9. Looked down at everyone below. In the statue's hands lay the Small matchbox-sized gold and jewel-encrusted box containing the sacred relic, which had been ceremoniously brought from the guarded cave several hours earlier. Samja, his head bowed and hands in the way position, chanted a prayer for enlightenment, wisdom, and courage. His chanting continued for several minutes, and then he fell silent. The two hooded monks who stood on either side of the statue lit more of the heavily scented essence sticks, positioned around the statue in small sand traps. This took several minutes. And, as small wisps of smoke started emanating from the sticks, the air started to fill with a fragrant, earthy aroma. After all 30 sticks were lit, Samcha took the small box from the statue's hands and turned to face the prone monks. He held the box high above his head and uttered a command in an ancient Siamese dialect, lost to the world except for those in this holy place. The monks now sat and looked at the holy box and, in a singular crescendo, praised the Lord Buddha so loudly that it seemed to resonate in nirvana. This carried on for several minutes, all in perfect tone, perfect pitch, and perfect unison. Samcha was first to notice the change in the aroma surrounding the temple. Samcha's sense of smell, as that of all Tinja monks, was honed to be the same as a hunting or prey animal. The fragrant aroma of the incense had been replaced by something that he'd come across before. It was similar to the sweet, nutty smell given off by the cakes at the village bakery. Almonds. However, he knew this was not cake. It was something more modern and, his senses told him, far more sinister. The wispy curls of smoke now turned into large plumes. Samja shouted out and clasped the box to his body. The other monks were now on their feet, hurrying toward Samja. The hooded monk, standing to the right of the statue, thought he saw the monk to his left side putting on a black mask, but he ignored this and went to protect his master. Confusion reigned as, one by one, the monks fell unconscious to the floor. Samja fell 10 against the statue, and the holy box tumbled from of his hand. He looked up at the smiling face of Buddha, the last face he was to see in this life. The smoke filled the temple and, as each monk collapsed with confusion etched upon their faces, surrendered to this mortal coil and dispatched to their nirvana. One figure still standing was a hooded monk, who quietly walked through the smoke to the lifeless body of the dead prime master. He bent down, retrieved the holy jeweled box and placed it in a small pocket inside his tunic. He looked through the smoke at the blurred orange-clad figures of the monks, now either dead, or writhing and convulsing on the marble floor. One monk, in particular, caught his gaze, and he stared for several moments until the monk's body ceased all movement. Slowly, but purposely, he then made his way to the back entrance of the temple where, once outside, he removed his S-16 respirator and took a gulp of fresh air. He removed his robes, stood in his camouflage undergarment, and picked up the remainder of the cyanide flares. I do not want to leave any evidence, he thought. He bundled up his robe into a crude rucksack and tied that, along with his deadly evidence, to his back. He took a last deep breath and ran off toward the jungle. The back door of the temple was left ajar, and a faint cough was followed by a dull thud, as the other hooded monk came stumbling through. He had used his robe to filter some of the gas, and held his breath as the deadly cyanide billowed out around him. Somehow, he'd found the strength to run out of the gas stream into the fresh air, letting out his breath in a loud, throaty roar and inhaling deeply. He filled his lungs with air. Still wheezing. He bent over and vomited. He turned his head and caught a glimpse of a figure running into the distance and then disappearing into the jungle. He collapsed, unconscious. 11. The Emerald Buddha is a large gold-colored statue of a sitting Buddha approximately 50 feet high. On its head is a carved emerald, approximately 4 inches high, with the effigy of Buddha carved into it. This is mounted in a small gold and glass case. The Thais regard this as the holiest Buddha in Thailand. It is open to the public, as are some other parts of the imperial palace. Temple of the Emerald Buddha. 12. Chapter 1. The silence was broken by a high-pitched screech, followed by several beeps. A hand came out from under a small bundle of blankets and slapped the top of the alarm clock. Mumbling, the sound of breaking wind and the grating of a scrotum being scratched signal that Stu was final wide awake. He pulled back the blankets and rolled out of bed. He made his way over to the light switch. Bloody freezing, he thought, but never mind as this time. Tomorrow I will be basking in the sunshine. He looked over to an armchair, where a white bundle of fur lay with its eyes open, staring at Stu as he switched on the light. Come on, lazy dog, get your useless carcass up. You are going on holiday, said Stu. Stu had moved back to Cleethorpes, a small northern English coastal town, and had been living there in a flat above a hair salon for 4 years. Although born and raised there, he had moved away when he was 17 and joined the Royal Navy. After 14 years he'd left the Navy, and spent the next several years moving around the country before deciding to return to Cleethorpes and set up a furniture business. Stu purchased a cheap dilapidated shop house and fixed it up so that it was habitable. He rented out the shop to a hairdresser, and a downstairs flat behind the shop he had leased to his friend. Stu lived upstairs with his old white boxer dog, Chunky. Although he'd had several women in his life, they had never stayed with him long, possibly due to the fact they didn't really like him. He remained alone with his faithful companion, who he had dragged around the country for 8 years. Chunky was 13. Purchased as an 18-month-old unwanted pet and, when brought from the animal rescue shelter to meet her new owner, she had thought she was in for an easy life. Poor, misguided animal. Chunky was well known for her stupidity and affection, by both the neighbors and local fire department, which had been called out on many occasions to free her head from the many railings and other obstacles that she had managed to become stuck in. Now into December, England was cold, and the icy chill cut to the bone. Keeping extremities warm was a full-time task, with the long periods of darkness causing deep depression among many of its inhabitants. England was not a nice place to live during the winter months, which is why Stu had decided to take his holidays now. He had staff that could take care of his business, and his friend, Tony, to take care of Chunky. He would be back before Christmas so he could spend time with his mom and friends. Stu was short but stocky, with a well-formed beer gut. He would be the perfect weight for his height, if he was 6'5", but he fell short of that by over a foot. His mousy brown hair always looked uncombed, mainly because it was end. Although he thought he looked handsome, in reality he had looks that only a mother could love. Not a rich man but never short of money, he had worked hard for what he had earned, and had the reputation of being thrifty, as tight as a duck's arse in water, to be more accurate. His friend Spock lived in Stu's downstairs flat. The two had been friends since childhood and had always kept in contact throughout the years, sharing many drunken adventures whenever Stu was in town. This included having his neighborhood closed off by armed police, looking for a crazed man in a checked shirt waving a shotgun around. This was actual YA shitfaced Stu, who had borrowed Spock's air rifle with 14. Its telescopic sights to look for a comet, which was supposed to have been easily viewed in the northeast night sky. Due to the fact that Stu didn't know which direction was northeast, he went outside and searched the sky using the rifle's sights, but to no avail, so he gave up, went inside and drank some more. Within 10 minutes the street was swarming with armed police searching for a crazy man waving a gun around. Spock had recently finished a relationship with his longtime girlfriend, who had decided after 10 years together that she didn't really like him. She did, however, like her boss at the fish processing factory where she worked. She even liked his new black eye and crooked nose, courtesy of Spock. Stu found a cheap flight on the internet to Bangkok and Pattaya and, after finding out they were in Thailand, advertised as the land of smiles. The two had booked 15 nights, flying from Manchester on December 7. They met several local lads who had already been to Pattaya and, after they had told them what to expect, they decided they had made the right decision. Stu had a hot shower, pool ed on his jeans and a thick shirt, and made himself a cup of tea. He opened a tin of dog food, which he scooped into a bowl, and went into the living room, leaving Chunky with her snout buried in the food. He sat in his armchair and went through everything silently in his mind. Bags packed, check. Tickets, passport, traveler's checks, check. Condoms, check. Dog food, 16 days supply, check. Train tickets, check. He knew that he had forgotten something but could not think what it was. Then he realized. Shit. He rushed out of his armchair and raced off downstairs. Spock, are you awake? He bellowed through the wall to the downstairs flat. Yes matey, came a muffled reply and continued, I'll be up there in 10 minutes. What time are you taking the dog and what time's the taxi coming? 15. Spock, whose real name is Peter Harris, and was a similar age to Stu, is a giant of a man with a large build and shaven head, making him resemble a large primate. He had earned his nickname at school because of his unusual large ears. Although not pointed, his lugs bore an uncanny resemblance to those of Star Trek's resident Vulcan, so he had been nicknamed Spock. The name had stayed with him all his life and even he sometimes forgot that his real name was Peter. He loved his newly single life, loved the parties, and loved his work as a hygiene engineer. Dustbin man. Spock was the life and soul of any party with his unusual party tricks. He would sit down, lift his legs to his neck, break wind and ignite this rather lethal gas that produced a blue flame. As methane met spark. He had lost all his top teeth in a run-in with a lump of 4x2 wooden club wielded by an unhappy customer during his stint as a bouncer several years ago. So, his other favorite trick was to remove his dentures, which he would then drop into some poor innocent drinker's pint of beer. And then, with a big cheerful laugh, apologize and offer to finish off the drink for them. This practice had all but ceased after one night at their favorite Indian restaurant, the Tiger of Bengal. Severely spannered, Spock decided to put his dentures into a girl's drink. In went the false teeth, but instead of shrieking hysterically, the girl just calmly finished her drink, tipped out the dentures and promptly threw them across the restaurant. Everyone found this amusing, except for Spock. The false gnashers were passed along. Spock ran around and tried unsuccessful to find out who had them. The restaurant's patrons were in hilarious uproar. The dentures were eventual found buried in a half-eaten bowl of Bombay mix and taken to the kitchen, cleaned and brought back to Spock on a small silver platter by a very perturbed Indian waiter. The restaurant is now fondly known as the Teeth of Bengal. The terrible twosome were now on their way. Chunky had been taken to her new residence for the next 16 days and the 16 lads were on the 12:40 train to Manchester Airport. They weren't due to fly out until 21:50, but they wanted to give themselves plenty of time to check in with China Airways and have a few drinks. They had got as far as Scunthorpe, a small industrial town 20 minutes from Cleethorpes, when Spock opened his small hand luggage and produced a half-full bottle of whiskey. "Still 3 hours until we get to the airport, so we might as well finish this off," said Spock and continued after Al, "We are on holiday and it would be a shame not to." They arrived in plenty of time and checked in their luggage. They were allocated aisle seats, and when told about the free drink service on the flight, they felt even happier. On the aeroplane, they met Nick, who was in the seat next to Spock and, as luck would have it, was traveling to Pattaya. Nick was staying 3 weeks, as he did not want to be in England over Christmas. He chuckled and told them that he would have a better Christmas in Pattaya. Nick stayed with his sister in Brighton, a southern English coastal resort, and made this journey many times a year, both for leisure pursuits and business, which, as he explained, was buying copy designer clothes and watches to sell back in the UK. He explained how it was becoming more difficult due to the Thai government's restrictions on copy merchandise. He gave Spock and Stu some information about what to expect in Pattaya, the routine about paying bar girls, where to change money and how much to pay for things. The two lads listened intently, a special why about the girls. The only time they spoke was when Stu asked about brothels, to which Nick replied, chuckling, "There aren't any. Wait and see." That became his standard reply to all their questions. Wait and see. Just remember, whatever you do, fall in love with the place, but do not fall in love with the girls. 17. Nick was a typical Jack the lad. Fairly tall and lean, he spoke with a Cockney accent, which he explained he had picked up after spending many years in London working on construction sites. Too puny for a builder, probably a sandwich boy, thought Stu. The three got on like a house on fire and they decided to stick together once they reached Pattaya. Stu and Spock had never bothered to book a hotel. A friend advised them that it would be cheaper, and easier, to find a hotel once they arrived. This worried them both, but Nick confirmed it, stating that he always stayed at the same hotel, which always had plenty of available rooms, even during high season. High season in Thailand runs from November until March. This eased both their minds. The 12-hour flight brought them to Bangkok's Don Mueang International Airport at the local time of 1650, and once off the plane, the first priority involved several cigarettes in one of the smoking rooms within the airport. Once their nicotine levels had risen, they made their way through immigration, collected their luggage, cleared customs, and headed into the main airport building. They felt grimy and weary, but Nick said that it would soon pass when they arrived in Pattaya. Stu and Spock stopped at a currency exchange kiosk and converted £100's worth of travelers' checks into Thai baht, at the exchange rate of 72 baht to the pound. They made their way to the sliding exit doors. Stu and Spock took in the sights, namely the beautiful olive-skinned women who were walking around the airport, and they giggled like two naughty schoolboys. It was the same when they were 10 years old and their classmate, Mary Tate, lifted her skirt and pulled down her knickers behind the school bike shed. She gave the two embarrassed young lads a glimpse of something they would spend their adult life pursuing. Nick walked on, shaking his head. These two are in for a shock, he thought. Stopping at the automatic sliding exit doors, Spock and 18 Stu glanced at each other. They then both looked straight ahead and in unison spoke. "Well, Thailand, we're here." They took another pace forward and the automatic doors silently slid open and they all stepped out of the cool air-conditioned airport building into the warm night. Spock and Stu faced each other and together hollered, "Fuck me. It's hot." 19. Chapter 2. There was an eerie, surreal aura in the village of Salaburi. The villagers wandered around aimlessly, gathering, and constructing, although in a state of shock and disbelief. It had been 2 days since the deadly intrusion on their holy domain. Several soldiers were now in the village, but they just wandered about aimlessly. Porntip, whose nickname was Pon, lay in the monks' living quarters. He had been drifting in and out of consciousness since Kun Senet found his near-lifeless body outside the rear of the temple. Senet had checked the Falan monk and determined that he was still alive. Then he noticed that the rear door of the temple was open. He approached the door and was met by an unusual aroma. He put his robe over his nose and mouth and entered. In the main hall, the smoke had almost cleared. Senet gagged when he saw his comrades and family lying dead on the floor, their features and bodies contorted. He saw the body of the Prime Master leaning against the statue of Buddha. Feeling a little giddy and devoid of rational thought, he left the temple and went outside to tend the Falan Pon. Then, as if in a hypnotic trance, he hoisted the monk over his shoulder and carried him to the living area. Kunvichi was sitting in the classroom, listening to Kun Tangrat as he gave lessons to the young monks on the teachings of Buddha. Vichi, the former Prime Master, at 86 was the oldest monk. While his sight was completely gone, his mind was still razor sharp. Vichi liked to sit in on the lessons of the youngsters, who ages ranged from 2 to 9 years old, a special Y20. When the ceremony of the Great Journey was held, he also enjoyed talking to the older monks who were excluded from the ceremony because they were too old to make the pilgrimage to Bangkok. The door of the classroom burst open. Senet stumbled in with Pon over his shoulder. Senet put the unconscious Pon down on a mat and struggled to catch his breath. "What's happening?" asked the old blind master, as the young students rushed to aid Senet and Pon. Pon slipped in and out of consciousness and was too weak to tell them much. They put him on a small sleeping mat where the monks tended him and administering medicinal herbs. Several hours passed. Senet had been treated for shock, and when he regained his faculties, relayed what he had witnessed in the temple and about the dead monks. Their first reactions were utter shock and horror, followed by disbelief, and then anger. Vichi told them that they have to get a message to His Majesty the King. They would send a monk to meet with the king's escort at the Thai/Cambodian border town of Phang Ram. At a pre-arranged time the following day and relay what had happened. The wise king would decide what to do. Senet, the youngest of the older monks, was chosen to make the trek through the jungle. It usually took 12 to 14 hours. But he had not made the journey for many years. Now 74, the prospect was daunting, but Senet took up the challenge with enthusiasm. The journey through the jungle was arduous for the old man. With no compass or navigational aids and no tracks or roads to follow, he relied on his memory and knowledge of the terrain. The trek took 16 hours. He arrived at the meeting point at 7:30. Even though his most recent visit to the palace had been 4 years ago, the meeting point was still familiar. At a nearby food stall, the owner gave him a large bowl of pad thai noodles. 21. Which he gratefully accepted. The owners of the stall had been there for many years and had been expecting the monks. The monks would eat and, in return, bless the food stall before being driven away in large army transport trucks. The arrival of a single monk confused them, but the stall owners never asked questions. 3 large Unamog army trucks that came to a halt by the lone monk stood on a circular patch of earth alongside the road. The chief of the palace guard, who always came along for this assignment, leapt out from the leading truck and approached Senet. The chief of the palace guard was a position bestowed upon a high-ranking regular army officer once his active service had finished. Although it held no official army rank, because the duties were only at the palace, the position came with the power to mobilize the entire Thai army, if necessary to protect the king. Kun Taksin Sawalsdi was a retired army lieutenant colonel and had held the chief's title for 8 years. It was an enviable position and he and his family loved living at the palace and enjoyed the trappings of power which came along with the job. Taksin listened to Senet intently and formulated the next course of action. He would have to inform the king, but first had to secure the area until they could gather all the facts. Who could have done such a terrible act and why? He phoned the nearest army garrison in Phang Ram. That used to be his old infantry command and the commander was a good friend and excellent soldier. His request to send 5 of his best infantry soldiers to his position was immediately granted. He strode over to the second troop carrier and spoke to a lieutenant sitting in the passenger seat. The lieutenant got on his radio and gave an order to the other troop carriers. The large vehicles then turned around and headed off back along the motorway towards Bangkok. 22. Taksin stayed with Senet. He could see that the old monk looked weary, but there was a look in his eyes that he could only interpret as pure rage. Taksin explained that he would send the infantrymen back to the village with Senet and then mobilize more forces and an inquiry team to find who had committed this sin. He removed a notepad from his pocket and, with pen in hand, asked directions to the village. The old monk glared at him and spoke in his ancient Siamese dialect, but realizing Taksin did not understand, quickly reverted to Thai language. That won't be necessary. I will escort your soldiers and we will do any inquiry, and report directly to the king. Taksin knew the fearsome reputation of his charges and nodded. They can do their investigation and I will do mine, he thought. He gave Senet his card with his mobile telephone number. He knew that most of the monks would never have seen a phone, let alone knows how to use one, but it seemed to be the only thing he could think of doing, while they waited for the soldiers. Not another word was spoken between them. 20 minutes later, 5 non-commissioned officers, 1 master sergeant, 1 sergeant, and 3 corporals, pulled up in 2 camouflaged army jeeps. The master sergeant leapt out of the lead jeep, snapped to attention, saluted Taxon, and reported their names and readiness to serve. Taxon returned the salute, and informed the sergeant he wanted him and his men to go to the village with Senate and assess the situation, make the area secure and report to him, and only him. The sergeant returned to the jeep and gave instructions to the men. They then filed into the second jeep, leaving Taxon with 1 jeep for his own use. They bunched up in the jeep to make room for Senate. Taxon turned to face Senate, giving him a long respectful way. The old monk returned the way and looked at the men waiting in the jeep. "It's this way, and a long walk, so please keep up," he said as he turned and walked towards a field leading to the jungle. 23. Covered hills. The 5 soldiers scrambled out of the jeep and ran to catch up to him. The trek through the jungle proved to be grueling for the young soldiers. They were trained in tropical forests and had done many combat simulations in different terrains, but nothing had prepared them for this. It was now dark and the moon was hidden by the dense tree canopy. In the pitch blackness, they tied themselves together with vine and, although it was attached to the monk, no one could see what lurked underfoot. Even carrying their .45mm service handguns and 1 portable GPS monitor with location tracker, they still felt terrified. The elderly monk never spoke, and although the many biting insects attacked the soldiers relentlessly, the old monk never appeared to be touched. The soldiers were not prepared for this and they hadn't brought any rations. After 10 hours of rapidly stomping through mud, over rocks, and trying to avoid walking into trees, a young corporal collapsed. The other soldiers rallied around him. The old monk came over to the huddled group of soldiers, knelt down and said, "Okay. We will stop for a short while and eat," he said. Senate stood up, untied himself and walked off into the darkness. Confused, the soldiers started a fire and huddled around, hot, thirsty and exhausted, they chatted about the day's events. Almost an hour later the monk returned with 2 small dead pythons around his neck, a bunch of bananas, several coconuts, and a bag made from banana leaves. The old monk just appeared by the fire, making the soldiers nervous. Who was this strange monk, they thought. Senate prepared and cooked the snakes, they drank the coconut milk and ate its milky flesh and, as they ate the bananas, the old monk opened the bag, spilling the contents in front of the soldiers. He laid several unfamiliar fruits and some banana leaf packages. He peeled back the leaves to reveal a foul-smelling paste, which he told them to rub on their uncovered areas, their face and hands, informing them it would 24. Keep the insects away and relieve the stings and bites already received. While the soldiers complied, the monk split open the fruits, which had a sickly sweet aroma. Senate then took a white poppy pod from his tunic, opened it, crushed the seeds between 2 stones and sprinkled the powder over the open fruits. He gave the soldiers half each, saying, "Eat this. It will give you power and dull any pain." He then tied himself back to the soldiers and waited until the last one had eaten his fruit. "Come on, we still have a long way to go." "How long?" asked one weary soldier. "Oh, we are well over halfway," replied Senate as he turned and walked ahead. Pon had now regained consciousness, although his chest felt On fire with every breath. Vichy stayed at his bedside most of the time, and the young monks came in to administer herbal medicines prepared by the elder monks. Pon had told Vichy what he had witnessed in the temple, and about the other hooded monk next to the statue. He explained how the incense sticks had flared up and given off a strange aroma, and how he'd filtered some of the gas with his tunic, before running out. Then he fell silent, stared at the ceiling, and whispered, "I am ashamed, master. I have to retrieve the holy relic and avenge my brothers." He then lapsed into a deep sleep. Vichy was confused and considered how was somebody able to get amongst the Tinju unnoticed and wipe out the most diligent warriors in the kingdom. Moreover, for what reason? Who could have possibly known so much about the whereabouts of Salaburi, the layout of the temple, the holy relic's location, and the timing of the ceremony? Only the monks and a few villagers knew this. He reached down and touched the forehead of the sleeping Pon. Resting his hand on Pon's head, he looked down towards Pon. 25. And, in his dark world, muttered, "Don't be ashamed for living. Young Pon. You are our only warrior left, our only hope for the survival of our creed and culture. You will deal out our vengeance. Of that I am sure." The old man then started chanting a prayer to Buddha for strength for Pon. He knew an eye for an eye was not the Buddhist way, but they are Buddha's warriors, and greed, he was sure, played a part in this crime. Senate and the soldiers arrived at the village in the early hours of the morning. It had taken them 18 hours to trek through the hostile terrain, and they were tired, hungry, and sore. Senate took them straight to the monks' quarters that were not usually open for outsiders, but these were exceptional circumstances and no other places were yet available. He woke 2 young monks and gave instructions to feed the soldiers. His old bones ached and his body cried out for rest. Nevertheless he went to Pon's sick bed, knowing he would find Vichy there. Senate had been trekking for nearly 2 days, but he had a duty. And a Tinja never rested until that duty had been fulfilled. He entered Pon's sickbay. Vichy sat beside the sleeping Pon on his thin mattress, his eyes open and staring straight ahead. Unsure of whether he was asleep or awake, Senate gave a respectful way to the old master. Vichy felt Senate's presence and returned the way. Senate sat beside Vichy. Senate inquired about Pon and was relieved to hear he would be fine once the poison had been expelled from his system. He informed him of his meeting with Taksin, the arrival of the soldiers, and the fact the king had been informed. "Good," said the elder monk. "You have done well, my old friend. This duty was concluded, so now go to rest." Senate headed to where he had left the soldiers. They were all huddled in a group, sound asleep, and the food they had been served remained untouched on the large dried banana leaf woven mat in front of them. Senate sat down and ate. 26. The master sergeant awoke around 4 hours later and looked around at his surroundings, now illuminated by daylight. He woke his men, who slowly arose and surveyed the room. 2 of the younger monks sat in deep meditation behind the soldiers. When they became aware that the soldiers were awake, one boy got up, and slowly and silently slipped out of the room. The other boy monk wayed the group and pointed to the food covered by a fasci, a wicker dome used to keep insects off, on the mat. "Please eat. We shall bring some fruit and water." They returned the way, removed the fasci, and heartily tucked in. Once they had eaten, the soldiers left the quarters and went outside into the hot, humid grounds of the Wat. The villagers and the monks were already busy fetching large brittle blue rocks, and what appeared to be white charcoal. The monks crushed this to powder and mixed it with other powders and a thick and sticky amber liquid. The soldiers, not quite sure what to do, wandered aimlessly around the village for several hours until Senet retrieved them and put them to work with a carpenter, making what looked like canoes from cut-down trees. 59 large bundles were laid out in a line, along the back of the wad, each wrapped in a type of cloth that gave off a pungent odor, which made the soldiers gag. 58 bodies had been recovered from the temple while Senet was away. Another body was later found unceremoniously dumped behind some rocks several meters from the cave's mouth. The remaining monks gathered around their Fal and brother. They had seen the 5 mm puncture mark the dead monk had at the back of his neck and knew the cause of it. "You know what this means," said Vichy to the elders. They nodded in unison. A long, curved spike with 8 slits around the point and a carved wood handle, a patu, would be inserted into the back of 27. The neck. It would pierce the base of the skull and go into the medulla oblongata, the part of the brain that controls all major bodily functions, including breathing and heartbeat. Once it had reached its target, the bearer would press a catch on the handle, and 8 blades would spring out of the slits. With a quick twist, the medulla oblongata would be turned to mush, and death would be instant. Once the catch was released, the blades would spring back and the patu could easily be removed. Using one hand to cover the victim's mouth and one hand to operate the patu, it was a silent, devastatingly efficient weapon. It was exclusively a Tinja weapon, and their preferred method to dispatch their duties off to the afterlife. So Vichy not only knew how the perpetrator got in, he also thought he knew who it was. He would follow this up after seeing his fallen brothers safely on their way to Nirvana. The dead monk was swathed and placed with the others. The monks, villagers, and soldiers worked long into the night on their appointed tasks. At twilight of the 3rd day, they all gathered at the rear of the Wat, on the large area the monks used for combat training and as general meeting place for the village. Pon had joined the remaining 15 monks. Although still weak, he felt that he had to see his brothers off on their last journey. A long marble altar stood about 4 feet off the ground in the center of the area. On the altar lay 59 of the canoe type containers, all lined with hammered gold obtained from within the mountains. Each canoe contained a body swathed in a Hessian cloth and coated with pungent paste. They had been covered with hardened blue-white clay, wrapped in banana leaves and coated in a thick, syrupy substance, which was then smeared over the top. The remaining monks, all in ceremonial robes, stood behind the large rapidly constructed altar, facing the kneeling villagers and soldiers and chanting from the holy scriptures. Senet had previously warned the soldiers to keep their heads bowed well below the altar. They had asked Senet 28 many questions, to which he only replied, "That is our way," and when asked about the substance covering the bodies, he just said, "It is called warm lorn, sun blaze." The twilight slowly gave way to darkness, the chanting stopped, and starting from the left, 2 young monks lit the coffins. Each ignited immediately, and vivid orange and yellow flames filled the night air. Within a few seconds, the flames turned blue, and the monks, villagers, and soldiers assumed a prostrate position, their heads lower than the altar. The flames glowed white for a split second, then, whoosh! A column of White light as bright and as hot as the sun shot into the night sky. It was over in an instant. The silence and blackness of the night returned. They remained silent for several moments. Vichy then got to his feet first, and beckoned everyone to rise. The smell of scorched wood filled their nostrils, and all that now remained on the altar was 59 glowing blobs of gold. The following day, they would be taken to the sacred burial site, but for now, the monks would meditate and reflect on their own, while the villagers and soldiers would party and celebrate the holy ones' lives. Pon now felt stronger. He had been given medicinal herbs and king cobra liver and had regained most of his strength. It had been 5 days since the terrible event took place, and he knew that if he wanted to catch the culprit, and avenge his brothers, he would have to leave soon, although he did not yet know whom he was chasing. At Senate's suggestion, he had traded with one of the soldier, a gold nugget with the Buddha's image intricately carved on it, for his mobile phone. The young corporal thought he had made a good trade. This must be worth a fortune, he thought, that is if we ever get out of here. The soldier taught Pon how to use the phone, but as there was no signal in this area, he could only pretend. Pon thought he had the gist of 29. His new tool, and Senate had given him Taxon's card. This was a start, he thought. He had a large cloth hold-all containing some dried food, liquids, edible roots and leaves, some small round clay containers of various powders including sunblaze, his tinderbox, sharpening and carving tools, his new mobile phone, and his ornaments. Laid out beside him was his glaive, a small double-bladed weapon, with each blade crescent-shaped and razor-sharp. At the center, a handle wrapped with cotton, making it the same thickness as the blades. This could be used like a dagger to slash or stab, and could be thrown and would cut through the air like a disc. It was very deadly and extremely accurate. His sword resembled a samurai sword. 7 inches of the rear side were serrated and used when hunting, for sawing through animal bone and cutting up the carcass for easy transport. It had a hollow handle with a skillful Y-engraved tight-fitting flip-top that contained his patu. Pon meditated. He had listened to Vichy telling him of his suspicions, but as the old master had told him, it was only his doubts and he had no firm proof. Pon was confused and unable to understand why anyone would do this, although in the next few minutes he would learn as to the whom. Vichy entered and went over to Pon, and he was accompanied by an old woman from the village. Pon was shocked, as villagers, especially women, were not allowed in there. It must be important, he thought. Vichy introduced the woman as Banti Measley. Pon recognized her from his morning pilgrimages around the village, when he and the other monks would go to acquire food, a ritual to learn humility. The villagers, always happy to give food in return for a blessing. The pair sat down in front of Pon, and Vichy encouraged Banti to tell Pon about her son. She tearful explained that 8 years ago her youngest son had gone into the jungle to hunt and never returned. She had always feared he had been killed and eaten by wild tigers, which still inhabited the tropical forest. With tears in 30 her eyes, she told Pon of her young son's bravery and skill as a hunter and her pride at her eldest son being a Tinju, although Banti was unsure which monk was her son, as only the prime master and a few elder monks knew from which family the monks were taken. She went on to explain that her youngest son became close with a Tinju named Jin, who, at 4 years his Senior, was the right age to be his brother. They could all feel a bond with Jin, who she was convinced was her eldest son. She handed Pon a clear resin-covered charcoal drawing of her youngest son. This is him. This was my beloved Dam. He was 17 at the time this was sketched, said the old woman, tears flowing from her sad old eyes. Vichy and the old woman stood up, and she weighed them both, and with great sadness spoke. With Jin being murdered in the temple, means that now I have lost both my sons. Please find who is responsible. I beg you. Banti left the room, leaving her drawing with Pon, who had a strange feeling about this woman. Once Banti left, Pon looked at Vichy. Master, I don't understand. What has this woman's dead son to do with this? Vichy explained. Her son went into the jungle and never returned. His disappearance was an enigma. It was presumed he had been killed by a tiger, but these timid animals avoided any contact with us. Vichy paused and solemnly continued. Dam has been the only person in Salaburi unaccounted for during my lifetime. I knew young Dam, and he was a strong boy and extremely well taught in the way of the Tinju, and I spoke to him 2 days prior to his disappearance. Our conversation did not end well. He is the who, of that I am certain. Pon thought for a moment. He remembered this lad who always hung around the temple and trained with them. He 31. Remembered thinking at the time, why was a villager allowed so much freedom around the holy temple? Pon knew Jin, they were almost the same age, and he knew how much Jin had grieved for his brother after Dam's disappearance was announced. They had been inseparable. Pon folded the drawing of Dam and placed it in his bag. Master, now I must leave, said Pon, feeling he now had a direction. Yes, young warrior, and I pray that Buddha will guide and protect you, replied Vichy. 32. Chapter 3. The three lads pulled up in a taxi outside the reception of a large hotel. The 2-hour journey from Bangkok airport allowed Stu and Spock to take in all the sights, the modern buildings and motorways of the sprawling Bangkok metropolis surprised them. This was not the dirt tracks or wooden huts they'd expected. What a revelation! Pattaya also had the same effect, as the taxi drove along streets lined with hotels, restaurants, and large shops and, to their relief, McDonald's and KFC. They checked into the Siam Sawasht Sea Hotel. Stu and Spock could not believe the price was only 450 baht a night, which they calculated to be only £7 sterling. They made their way to their rooms located on the 3rd floor. The large rooms contained a large queen-size bed, a wardrobe, dressing and bedside tables, large television, and a small fridge stocked with beer, soft drinks, and bottled water. There was a small ensuite bathroom with a toilet, basin, shower and small hose with a nozzle at the side of the toilet, a sort of portable bidet that fired a strong jet of water up your Jack's aqueous toilet roll, thought Spock. A patio door led out onto a small balcony, and Nick, having the corner room, had a small opening window behind his door. The instruction from Nick was, quick shit, shower, shave, shampoo, and then go out. 33. It was past 8 o'clock and, although jet-lagged from the long journey, Spock and Stu wanted to see the place that was known as Sin City. Nick explained that the streets joined or branched off the main roads and known as swas. Some were numbered and some named. Nick planned to start off in Swa 6. And informed them that this was a short time Swa Great, said Stu, not knowing what he was talking about. They walked out of the hotel and got on a bot bus, one of the many small covered pickup trucks that circled the city's one-way traffic system. Stu and Spock noticed that on the way to SWA 6 there was bars, loud music, and a lot of people dancing, waving and having a whale of a time. SWA 6 joined Second Road to the beach road and lined with small and large air-conditioned bars on both sides. Each bar had its windows covered by signs or dark glass, making it impossible to see inside. Young, scantily clad women sat in groups outside the bars, chatting and fixing their makeup, like a group of muggers waiting for a victim. The lads paid the 10 baht bus fare and went into the first bar, which was on the corner of the SWA. The women sitting outside leapt up, surrounded them and dragged them inside, in the nicest possible way. The inside of the bar was very dimly lit and the lads were shown over to an L-shaped sofa. They sat down and ordered 3 bottles of Singha beer, the local Thai brew, slightly sweet and with a hint of nut in the flavor, but a lot stronger than most European beers. The sound of other people in the bar chatting and laughing eased Stu and Spock's mind. We're not going to get murdered, they thought. Their beer was fetched over by a young, scantily clad woman, followed by 2 equally scantily dressed women. One woman, 34, sat next to Nick, the other 2 ladies sat either side of Stu and Spock, who sat close together, like 2 Catholic nuns at a rugby team party. They had a mortal fear of being stitched up with a katoi, ladyboy. They had heard the stories from their mates at home who had been to Thailand and allegedly had mistakenly been hitched up with a katoi. Make sure you check their feet size, check for an Adam's apple, check between their legs, before you go anywhere near any of those girls, they were advised. This had played on their mind, even more so now that they were actually in the situation. Even though Nick tried to reassure them the stories were untrue. What a load of bollocks, he would say. Still unsure, Stu ignored the 2 girls and turned to Nick. Is this a brothel, mate? It amused Nick to observe these Pattaya virgins in action. He remembered his first time here and knew he'd acted the same. No mate, not exactly, he mused. He then leaned over and said something to the lady sitting next to Stu. With a look of annoyance and disbelief, she looked at Stu, stood up and lifted her short skirt to reveal her bare pubic region. Me not ladyboy. Me lady. Sure. This came as a shock to both Stu and Spock, as flashes of Mary Tate went through both their minds. The woman then spent the next few moments convincing them that she was indeed a woman. 10 minutes later, thoroughly reassured and enjoying their ice-cold beers, Stu turned to face Spock, who had a stupid, dopey contented grin on his face. What an amazing little place, he said, looking down between his legs at his naked midsection and approving of the oral dexterity of his temporary, but amenable new friend. 35. Yada, replied a chill-ed out Spock, looking down at his own small sack emptier, doing her thing, very expertly, he thought. All memory of Mary Tate had disappeared. Several beers later, after the girls had finished giving relief to the 3 grateful lads and had been given their reward for their services, namely 500 baht and a few glasses of overpriced wine cooler, the lads decided it was time to move on. They paid their bill and, with Nick mumbling about the price of the ladies' drinks, strolled out into the hot night. Sacks empty, spinning heads and slightly juiced, they made their way down SWA 6. They ran the gauntlet of women jumping off their seats and screaming at them to come into their bars and informing them that they were sexy men and fondling their now empty sacks and todgers. They resisted further temptation and got on a boat bus at Beach Road. "Where next, matey?" inquired Spock. "Swat, Nick replied. "What's there?" asked Stu. "Wait and see," said Nick. "We don't sleep alone in Thailand." Swat buzzed with life. Music blared out from the many open-air bars, with every bar trying to outvolume the others. Only a musical cacophony could be heard. One bar played the Eagles, one bar playing the Scorpions. However, that only contributed to the lively atmosphere of Swat. Girls screeched at passing customers to come inside, please. The occasional bell rang at various bars, much to the delight of the women who worked there, as it was the signal that they would be getting a free drink. Lights flashed. Street vendors walked around selling everything from chewing gum to fake watches, and they went from bar to bar, looking for any drunken, gullible foreigner, egged on by the girls to buy me this, darling, the customer would be promised. Undying, everlasting love. At least until his money ran out. 36. The atmosphere of Swat was indescribable. Young men, old men with big beaming smiles sat at the bars playing bar games. Connect 4, Jenga, Swallow the sausage. Occasional crash of wood was heard as some foreigner had lost, yet again, and he had to buy a drink or ring the bell. An occasional holiday couple walked past, the husband's head bent down looking at the floor, while his wife's head glared at her husband to ensure that he wasn't peeking at the girls. No matter who was there, the tourist was always treated the same. After all, they were paying, and the Thai slogan is always money number one. The lads positioned themselves at one of Nick's regular bars. He said hello to Juan, the mamazan, bar manager. He introduced Stu and Spock, who could only manage a grunt, as they tried to take in the never-before-experienced sights and sounds. Juan gave instructions to two women, who promptly went to a large freezer and removed two small packages. They went over to Stu and Spock, popped open a pattaya cold towel, and proceeded to rub the ice-cold towel over Stu and Spock's neck and arms. The two lads cooed with satisfaction, as the heat was intense for them. Even at night. Never this hot in Cleat Horpies. They weren't prepared for Thailand's heat, so the pattaya provided a welcome relief. 3 bottles of ice-cold beer were placed in front of them, along with a small wooden pot containing their bil. Another bil would be added every time they bought a drink. They thankful why took a long slow mouthful of their ember fluid, followed rapidly by several more. They bought drinks for the 2 girls who had wiped them down, and while Nick conversed with the mamazan, the 2 lads made small talk with their newly acquired companions, speaking pidgin English, with the odd Thai phrase thrown in. Spock and Stu listened to Nick, who seemed to be speaking the same way, with certain Thai phrases repeated. This, they decided, was not difficult to understand, and they could therefore have a limited conversation. Mostly, the women inquired where they came from, how long they planned to stay. 37. And did they have ladies yet? The women seemed to show more interest when the 2 lads said they did not have ladies. However, they became disappointed when the woman with Spock asked, "I go with you, sexy man." Spock towered over the woman, but she was still undaunted. Spock, not quite full why grasping what she'd meant, replied, "I don't think we are leaving yet, love." At that point, the woman said something to her friend in a raised voice, and they promptly got off their stools and went over to talked to another older foreigner who had been sitting at the opposite side of the bar, much to the merriment of Nick, who had been earwigging in on this exchange. After the girls buggered off, Spock decided he would do one of his party pieces, and, as his dentures would not fit in a bottle, it was the flaming arsehole that would make its debut. He got off his stool, went to a small wicker armchair, sat down, lifted his legs either side of his waist, took his lighter and held it at his sphincter to await the arrival of its methane fuel. Right on cue, a bright blue flame shot out from his anal sphincter, followed a second later by a shorter flame. A good result, he thought, a double bubble. People at the bar and several others in the nearby vicinity were in uproar, clapping excitedly and asking for one more performance. Spock took a bow and walked back to his stool. Laughter still echoing around the area. He had now attracted several more women around him, and along with Stu, they looked like a couple of cats who had gotten the cream. Nick decided that he could do that and didn't want these new upstarts to upstage him at his regular drinking hole. He went over to the wicker chair previously occupied by Spock. The bar fell silent as allies turned toward Nick. Adopting the same position as Spock, he held a lighter in place, strained his bowels 38, and distorted his facial muscles for extra power, making him appear like a clay gargoyle. He felt the twinges of pressure, and a short blue flame rushed out from his sphincter, which was followed by a yellow fire, which rapidly increased in size around his now burning shorts. Stu turned and faced Spock. Maybe not a good trick to try in nylon shorts, he stated cool. Why? They both fell about laughing whilst Nick jumped around like a headless chicken trying to extinguish his shorts, assisted by genuinely concerned bar girls. After a few minutes, the commotion calmed down, apart from the odd sporadic chortle from Stu and Spock. Nick stood next to them at the bar, with a bag of ice held to his rear end by a small motherly girl. He occasionally winced as the bag moved, positioned to give the woman's arm a rest. Several more beers were consumed, and they approached a spannered state. Although the tiredness had worn off, the lads thought that they'd had too much excitement for one night and presumed Nick would want to go back to the hotel. On the contrary, and, according to Nick, the night had just got started. The girl who he had sent to buy him replacement shorts at the market returned a few minutes later. Nick dismissed his Florence Nightingale and announced they were moving on. Nick counted his change and gave the girl a 20 baht tip, which she grateful accepted. "That's not a lot for a tip," said Stu. The Mamazan spoke. Nick Kenia. Cheap Charlie. They paid their bill and Stu and Spock left a 100 baht tip. "You'll learn," said Nick as they headed off up Swayate to join Second Road. They walked along against the flow of traffic. The city was still alive with merriment and noise, and it seemed every bar was 39 having a party. In fact, the whole city seemed just like one big, marvelous party. They bought some food at one of the many barbecue stands en route, and walked along happily chomping on small bits of sweet pork, onion peppers and green chilies on wooden skewers. They ate sweet banana pancakes, cooked at another street stand, and, with food in their stomach, they steadily sobered up, and getting their second wind and having fun, walking among the many sporadic outcrops of bars and having the touts latching onto them, trying to drag them into have fun. "Buy one drink, just one please, sexy man," pleaded the girls, followed by the grabbing of an appendage. It amused Nick. and Stu to observe a woman, who weighed approximately 8 stones, trying to move a 20-stone Spock. They arrived at their destination, a small bar amongst several others situated on the ground floor of a row of 4-story buildings. These bars were more subdued than the hectic swayade. About 10 girls sat behind the bar and another 10 sat on stools in front, laughing and joking with customers, or playing bar games with their new beaux. The 3 entered and, although Nick's sphincter was still throbbing, it had eased enough for him to sit on a bar stool. They ordered their beer and Nick introduced Spock and Stu to the bar owner, a middle-aged Thai man known as Charlie. Although not his real name, he thought it sounded more foreigner-friendly. Nick explained they would have a few quiet drinks and then move on to a go-go bar for an hour before the bar's official Y closed at 1 o'clock. But, added Charlie with an impish look in his eye, some bars still stay open after hours. Chatting with Charlie, the 2 newcomers asked many questions. Charlie's wife came over, who, although slightly older than the other women present, the years had been kind to her. Well into her 40s, she still had her youthful looks, and they 40 could tell she must have been an absolute stunner in her younger years. I'd shag it, thought Stu, now feeling ready for more action. Would you like to take a lady to sleep with you tonight? She asked, looking to the 2 boys. Well, said Spock, there's nothing like being forward. Spock and Stu giggled nervously. We're okay, thanks, replied Stu. The conversation ebbed and Stu started looking around at the previously ignored girls sat around the bar. They all seemed sensibly dressed, some in jeans, blouses, and some wearing dresses. Compared with SWAS 6 and 8, these seemed very plain. Stu noticed a girl sitting behind the bar reading a book, which looked like a dictionary. She noticed Stu looking and smiled. Then she held up her English/Thai for beginners book so he could see it. Stu smiled back and she returned to her reading. Stu felt a little awkward but tapped Charlie's wife on the shoulder. What's that girl's name? He stammered. Deo, replied Charlie's wife, smiling. She is a good lady. And only worked in the bar for 3 weeks. Do you want me to have her come over and sit with you? No, no. I was only asking, Stu blushed. Are you sure? She asked again. Yes, I'm sure, thanks anyway, but I think we leaving. Stu took note of the sign behind the bar. Happy World Bar. The lads left the bar, walked down SWA 13, to Beach Road, and jumped onto a bot bus. Getting off at Walking Street, they walked about a third of the way along until they reached Champion A Go-Go. Passing a small beer bar, among the smiling girls an older but attractive woman shouted. 41. Hello to Nick, who boasted, I've done her. Sturdy. Old tug, but a good shag. A sexy young woman dressed in a white thong, small white bra, and knee-length black boots held the door to Champion open for them. Welcome, she cheerily shrilled. Would you like some drink? The long raised stage had 5 chrome poles set at its center at varying distances apart. As Guns N' Roses blasted out Sweet Child O' Mine, 5 girls danced and swayed around the poles. Occasional Y crouching down with legs opening and closing like a goldfish's mouth. They were all dressed the same as the girl who had opened the door and welcomed them, although some had removed their thongs and had them twirling around in their hands. After drinking several glasses of draft singa and watching the acrobatics of the ever-alternating ladies of the pole, they felt renewed vigor in their loins. Nick had explained his routine for taking girls back to the hotel. Pay the bar fine, take the lady to your room, do the business then, in the morning give them 500 baht, although they will ask for 1000 baht, only give them 500. This was alien to Stu and Spock, but if this was the time-old method, then who are they to argue with tradition, and besides, they were horny again. Spock had noticed that Stu did not appear to be his usual cheerful self, although he looked at the chrome pole molesters, his mind seemed to be elsewhere. However, he just put this down to tiredness and hoped that his old mate would be okay tomorrow. Spannered and rapidly moving toward shitfaced, they just burbled on about nothing. Spock. Occasional Y grabbed a passing dancer and played with her breasts, but he did buy her a drink as a reward. The girls didn't flinch, hoping they might hook him in and get a short time. Quick shag, and 1000 baht. 42. They decided that it was time they moved on before the bars closed. They walked into a small bar outside, sat down and ordered more drinks. They seemed to be finishing their drinks a lot quicker and, not being used to the strength of Thai beer, plus the long session, they'd reached wankered stage. Spock attempted to speak to the woman Nick had done, who had now gone from a sturdy old tug to a raving beauty in Spock's drunken mind. Nick drooled over another woman who just seemed to smile and nod. Spock looked up and, when his eyes centered from the spinning room, asked, "Where's Stu?" Nick turned his head away from his sodden companion. "He was here a minute ago." "I don't know." They remained concerned for of 10 seconds before resuming their drunken mating rituals. Stu and Spock had each taken a name card from the hotel, and had been given instructions to follow, should they become separated. Spock was the first awake. With a belch and a fart, he rejoined the living and checked his watch. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. He had changed his timepiece to local time, but thought that he could not have slept that long. His watch must be wrong. He tried to recall the events from the night before, but his memory was sketchy, and he remembered nothing after leaving Swat. With a raging thirst, he went over to his small fridge, took out a bottle of water and gulped down the cool liquid. He let out another rasping fart, still trying to search his memory. There came a groan from his bed, followed by a quilt being tossed off. "Oh yes," thought Spock, vaguely regaining his faculties, "I remember now." He looked at the smiling naked woman laid in his bed. "Men!" she exclaimed. Spock, not understanding that this meant bad smell, thought it meant good morning in Thai, and returned the greeting, much to 43. The confusion of Lek. He'd remembered that this was the sturdy old tug that Nick had previously done, but she now appeared a lot less attractive than she did the previous night. He could not recall having sex, which he thought better off not remembered. He then recollected something about Stu just disappearing. He pulled on his jeans, walked out of his room and banged on the door of the adjacent room. "Stu! Are you okay, mate?" A mumbled groan came from behind the door. "Yes, mate. I feel a bit rough though." "Me too," said Spock through the door. "I'm going back to my room. See you later." Spock returned to his room, and closed the door. Lek lay naked on the bed, and Spock noticed that she had a few stretch marks around the abdomen. Because he could not recall having sex the previous night, he decided that it would be a great shame to allow the twinge he now felt from his todger go to waste. He took out his condoms from the bedside table and presented them to Lek. She slid over to the standing Spock and rolled the condom over his manhood. She then placed the wrapped package in her mouth. Stu was awake, but only just. His head throbbed, and his mouth was as dry as the bottom of a birdcage and, confused, he looked around and became aware that this wasn't his house. Where was his shabby wallpaper? Where was Chunky? He then came to his senses and remembered where he was, and what he was doing there. He could not, however, remember what had happened the previous night. He recalled being in Happy World Bar and then going to a go bar, but everything else was just a blank. He checked his watch. It was 3:38, that can't be right, he thought. He then became aware of something in the bed beside him and turned to see a figure huddled under the quilt with their back turned. Oh no! He thought, what did I do? He gingerly 44. Pulled the light quilt off the figure, revealing a naked olive skinned back. The figure moved and turned around to face Stu. He looked at the face in front of him, looked down the body, at the pert breasts, with small pink-brown nipples, like small juicy raspberries. Stu had never seen anything so lovely. A small black-haired triangle, delicately nestled between crossed-over legs. He stared at her face. He had never seen an angel up close before. But he remembered seeing this one last night. He thought about the film The Godfather and how Michael Corleone got the thunderbolt when he met his Italian sweetheart. He had never experienced this before, but had now, even though Nick's words of wisdom still rang in his ears, don't fall in love with the girls. He knew where he had seen her, but could not recall when, or how, she had ended up being there. He was wankered last night. For sure, and although his head still throbbed, he was glad to be in this wonderland and as happy as a pig in shit to be right here. Right now. The slumbering figure opened her eyes, looked at Stu, smiled and spoke. Good morning, Pompui. Stu thought this was a nickname given to tourists. He later found out it affectionately meant fatty. He stared at this lovely lady and replied, Good morning, Deo. 45. Chapter 4. Although Thai people have forenames and surnames, their family also give them nicknames at a very young age. These names are chosen, usual by circumstances. For example, if it was raining when they are born, their nickname could be Fawn, meaning falling rain. If they are small, Noi or Lek, meaning small or little, could be used. They could also use a portion of their first name if it had a meaning. Duengdeo, for example, could be shortened to Deo, meaning star. They tend to use, and are known, by these usual short nicknames as opposed to long actual names throughout their lives, but revert to their real names when they reach middle age or obtain a higher status. The word Koan, literally meaning person, can be used preceding someone's name, similar to the use of Mr. or Mrs. K. Hansam Sak Ili, nicknamed Dam, meaning black, and now 25 years old, sat on the back of an open Toyota Hilux pick-up truck. He had donned his monk's robes in order to get a ride easier. The truck headed east towards Phnom Penh, the capital city of Cambodia. Dam had been trekking through jungle and mountains for 4 days and had made his way to a minor road, where he had managed to hitch a ride from a passing Cambodian market trader. The trader, surprised at seeing a monk in the middle of nowhere, a special one whose robes were in the Thai, Buddhist color, gave Dam a lift. 46. Dam wanted to go home. He had lived with his benefactor and guardian, an Irishman named Andrew Tohi, for 7 years now. They lived in Kokong, a small town 12 kilometers from Phnom Penh. He lived in a large, luxurious bungalow with Tohi and Miguel, a Spaniard, who had come to Cambodia with Tohi many years earlier. Dam's life was good. He had money in his pocket, ate well, drank well, had transport and many women. He was far better off than most of his countrymen, and all he had to do was the occasional favor for his good friend Andrew, and besides, most of the people that he'd killed deserved it. He was pleased when Andrew had given this favor to perform, and happy that after telling Andrew about the holy relic many years ago, his guardian had found a buyer, who stated that he owned a museum, so it would benefit all mankind. This, he thought, must be a fact, as even Miguel smiled while the story was being related. Dam tapped at a small, hard package in his robe pocket. He thought about Jin and how he watched him die in the smoke-filled temple. He felt a twinge of remorse. "Sorry, my brother," he said aloud. The sadness soon left him as his thoughts drifted back further, to his youth in the village of Salaburi. Dam was born and raised in Salaburi. His Meru mother had told him at an early age that his older brother had been taken to be a Tinju. Although sad that he would be raised as an only son, he had his 2 slightly older sisters. Dam was a small child and had a darker complexion compared to the other villagers, hence his nickname. An inquisitive child, who would often wander around the temple and watch the other monks in their combat training. He was very much a loner, preferring to watch the monks, explore, and discover secret little places around the temple. One day when Dam was 7 years old, he had been exploring the small mountainous hills at the side of the temple. He made his way around some rocks and noticed a cave. At the mouth of the cave stood 2 hooded monks with bows slung over their shoulders. They stood in front 47 of a large golden gate. The guards, on hearing him scrambling over the rocks, and immediately swung their bows into a firing position and, as quick as a lightning strike, removed an arrow from their quivers and pointed the deadly weapon at Dam, who froze in his tracks. The 2 monks recognized him as a village boy and shouted at him to leave immediately and never return, or they would kill him. Gripped by panic and fear, the young boy turned on his tracks, scrambling and stumbling back up the rocks. This cave had now become his nemesis. Dam was determined to become a monk and a warrior, and although his mother explained that Tinju are special white chosen, and unlike his brother, he was not a reincarnation, he therefore could never be a Tinju monk, this did not stop the young, determined Dam. Several years later, whilst on one of his jaunts to the temple, he had been mimicking some young monks' moves with kendo sticks. He became aware of someone behind him, and he spun around and faced a smiling monk, who looked around 14 years old, about 4 years older than him. He stared at the monk for a few seconds, and said, "Hello, my name is Dam." The monk introduced himself as Jin, and instantly Dam knew Jin to be his brother. Many years passed, and, although it was not usual while for monks to associate so closely with villagers, but Vichy, the prime master, had noticed the friendship develop between Dam and Jin, but wasn't unduly concerned. Dam was a likable lad, and made the monks laugh with his comical antics. Jin taught Dam everything that he had learned about hand-to-hand combat and weapons. Dam was allowed on the training ground to mock fight with the other monks and, although he usually got a good beating, he was undeterred. He thought that one day he would become a Tinju like his big brother. He did his schooling with his brother, learning about the wisdom of Buddha. The Tinju forged their own weapons and were taught how to fold 48. Steel and mix with locally mined black iron ore. This when mixed with other metals became a strong pliable material that could be easily folded and shaped. It was from this metal that they made their glaives and swords. The weapons were given to the novice monks at 10 years old, an age when they were considered ready to be able to undertake the great journey, and to meet the living Buddha. These weapons were the monks' responsibility and stayed with them for life. They were given unsharpened and undecorated, and it would be the monks' lifelong task to keep them sharpened and maintained, and it was up to them as to what decoration they engraved. The monk's day was filled with combat, fitness training, meditation, and spiritual learning. Dam enjoyed every painful minute and he and Jin became inseparable. Jin reached his 17th birthday and now at the age eligible to take the trial of the warrior. The trial of the warrior was the hardest event in the monks' lives, being the time they progressed from novice to warrior. The time of becoming a man. The trial consisted of several stages. First, a master would trek toward Pangnam Ram. He would be given a 2-hour head start, which for a fit master would take about 11 hours. The novice would then have to chase after him. When, or if, he caught up, he would then engage the master in combat with a kendo stick. The novice would have to reach the master before he reached Pangnam Ram. This meant the novice sprinting through the jungle for at least 20 kms. If the master reached Pangnam Ram before being caught, or the novice proved unworthy in combat, the novice would fail. He would then have to retake the test the next day, and every day after, until he succeeded. When the novice was successful, he would return to the village and, armed with his sword, he would have to navigate an assault course, chopping several obstacles on the way, from a watermelon to chunks of soft rock. This he did blindfolded. This 49. Tested his weapon's effectiveness and maintenance. He then had to shoot an arrow into a target 20 yards away, the target being an orange. The final test, armed only with his glaive, he had to survive in the jungle for 6 days. This was the moment Jin and every other monk trained for, and he was ready. It was the first day of Jin's trial. Kun Lignit had gone into the tropical forest 2 hours previously. The other monks lined up in the combat area, and stood in silent prayer. Vichy stood with Jin, his hand on the young monk's head as he chanted for strength for Jin. He then removed his hand and announced, "Let the trial begin." Jin wayed the Prime Master, and took off into the jungle. He had just entered the jungle, when he heard a sound from his left side. He spun around swiftly, removing his kendo stick from his sheath and looked upon the smiling face of Dam. "I will run with you, my brother, and hide while you beat Lignit," he laughed. Jin smiled, turned, and at full sprint took off, with Dam not far behind. 7 days had now gone by and Dam was anxious. He had seen Jin catch, and fight, Lignit and return to complete the assault course, but he knew he could not go into the jungle with Jin for his last trial, as that was forbidden. Dam paced up and down behind the hut where the other monks were gathered. Then out of the jungle, in the distance, he saw his brother running towards the area. The other monks formed 2 lines. and Jin sprinted between them to Vichy, who stood at the head of the formation. Jin came to a halt and wayed the Prime Master. Master, he said, I have completed my task, I wish now to take my place, and to do my duty as a warrior. 50. The old master turned around to a marble altar and removed a red sash, and placed it over the bowed head of Jin. He then took Jin's sword, glaive, bow, and patu, and placed them on his outstretched arms. You have earned the right to wear the symbol of our creed. And from this day you will hold the rank and title, warrior. Dam could not contain his excitement for his brother and dreamed of the day he too would stand there and receive the sash. Even though Dam had no weapons, he had carved a sword and glaive from wood, and when his brother sat down and carved intricate patterns in the steel or ivory handle, Dam would mimic this in his wooden weapons. He had never seen a patu before, and he would look at his brothers. I will carve one later, he thought, a proud day for the young villager. Several more years went by and Jin had learned a new skill and a new discipline. This he'd been told was a duty, and although the monks had only been called upon once in the last 50 years, which was one time to dispatch a rather nasty Japanese general, which was a duty concluded by a young Vichy. It had been something that they all had to know, and be proficient at, and prepared for. Jin had taught Dam some of the skill he had been taught, and when the curious youngster had asked what a patu was used for, he taught him how to use one. This he did in secret, not knowing if he was allowed to so or not, but he did not see any harm. This was his after all, his baby brother. Jin undertook guard duty outside the cave that housed the holy relic, and during his watch Dam would always sneak around to the cave and wait near Jin. Dam was no longer afraid of the cave, he had beaten his fear, and although they never spoke while Jin was on guard duty, just being near his brother made him feel safe. 51. Dam approached his 17th birthday, and although he was small, even by Thai standards, his small frame, like the other monks, was solid muscle. He knew he was ready to take the trial of the warrior. Heck, he thought, I did the first parts when I was 13. And rerun it many times since with Jin. He knew his life would change when he became a warrior, and he was ready to serve the King, Lord Buddha, Vichy, the Tinja monks, especially why his beloved brother Jin. On the day of his 17th birthday, he excitedly got dressed and ran over to the Wat. The monks had been in their morning meditation, so he waited for them to finish and went over to Jin. Now, he said, now my brother. Jin got to his feet, and he and Dam went to the temple. Vichy had been praying in front of the statue of the smiling Buddha, when the young warrior and his familiar companion approached, and he turned to face the boys. Master, said Jin, my young brother would like to take the trial of the warrior. He is well versed in the trial, and his service to our order would be invaluable. He has lived amongst us most of his life. The old man looked down at them both. He realized then that he had made a mistake. Vichy asked Jin to leave the temple and beckoned Dam to sit. They both sat cross-legged on the floor. Vichy explained that a Tinja monk had to be chosen, and could not be earned. It was a birthright handed down through millennia from the time of the first Tinja monks, and it could not be changed by man. Any man. Dam listened, his head thudded. All emotion had gone, and the words that now came out of Vichy's mouth were just a garbled, incoherent blur. He no longer paid any attention and was deep in his own thoughts, his own world, and his own depression. Vichy never mentioned. 52. The sacred relic, and he had hoped that Jin would not have told Dam about this. He was wrong. Vichy concluded by saying, "I am sorry young Dam, but we are always here for you. Your life can still be with us, and that will not change." Dam got to his feet and wayed the old master and walked outside. Dam, Dam. Called out Jin, but he was ignored as the young villager strode purposeful way home. Over the next few days, Dam wasn't seen around the temple area, or the village. Jin had been restricted to the temple, but not as a punishment. Vichy had realized the relationship between Dam and Jin had to ease. He had blamed himself for letting it go on for so long. He had caused irreparable damage to this youngster, who should have been learning a village trade like his parents. Dam stayed in his room for 2 days, emerging on the third with his small homemade bow. Banti, his mother, concerned about his well-being, asked, "Are you okay, my son?" To which Dam replied, "I am fine, mother," he said. "I am going into the jungle to hunt. I will be back later." He sniff kissed his mother on the forehead. She never saw her son again. Dam had stayed in the jungle just walking, hunting and sleeping, but mainly thinking. He knew that nobody had ever left the village before, and he thought that he would return once his head had cleared. He was bewildered and confused. He didn't know where he was going, didn't know where he was, and with 53. No purpose now in his life, didn't care. He had not realized during his trek that he had entered into Cambodia and was in unfamiliar terrain. Eventual why, he came upon a road. This confused him. He had never seen a road before, let alone this strange monster, which now headed toward him. He crouched back into the jungle as the monster roared past him, and then it came to a stop. An old man got out of the car and went over to where the now petrified Dam cowered. The man spoke to Dam in Cambodian, a language he was familiar. He had learnt this with Jin, along with Thai and their usual dialect, ancient Siamese. The old man took Dam over to his car. "Where are you going? Are you okay? What are you doing? Way out here, alone?" Dam tried to answer the old man's questions, but he wasn't sure exactly where he was heading. The old man offered him shelter at his home in Phnom Penh, and Dam grateful why accepted. They drove northeast toward the capital, an 8-hour journey. Dam was in wonderment by this strange machine. The old man and his wife took care of Dam for almost a year, and he soon adjusted to life in Phnom Penh. Although he missed Jin, his parents and his old lifestyle, he knew he would not return, as his confusion had now turned to anger, which was directed at the arrogant Tinju. Dam was a skilled artisan, but his real strengths lay in his fighting abilities, and he'd entered, and won, many barefist street fights, which, although not strictly legal, a blind eye was turned. These contests were brutal and often resulted in the death of a fighter, but Dam was good. He was Tinju trained, and although he was small, his speed and strength were unseen before by any of his opponents. The fighters were not paid much, about $5 per fight. However, a lot of money could be made from gambling at these fixtures. Dam earned a fearful reputation, and his fights were always well attended. He was a dynamic, ruthless fighter. It was at one of these fights that he gained the attention of Andrew, 54, Tohi, a well-known arms dealer from Ireland, who now lived in Cambodia. Tohi had watched Dam fight on several occasions and wanted this kid as his property. He knew that he could make a lot Of money from this young warrior, Tohi went with Dam to see the old man, who took care of him and gave him $100 and reassured the old man that he would take care of Dam and moved him into his bungalow, in Kokong. The relationship between Tohi and Dam became like father and son. Tohi was in his early 50s and he had no family, his only companion, a weaselly-looking Spaniard named Miguel. Tohi was an arms dealer and he bought purloined weapons and ammunition from Cambodia and Vietnam for very little money, and then sold them to Arab or Middle Eastern buyers, making a tidy profit. He was on the run from both Spain and Ireland. He had made a fortune in his home country by selling his father's herd of cattle many times over to gullible, but rich Irish farmers, who thought they were doing legitimate business with Tohi's father on a handshake. After selling the herd many times around Ireland and taking upfront payments, he then slaughtered the cattle and stuck on a phony EU stamp. He then sold the meat off in Europe, again for a tidy profit. He left his father to face the music, and went to Spain, £2 million richer. He then developed property in Marbella, a tourist resort in Spain, ripping people off for money on property. His favorite trick was to get his friend and minder, Miguel, to sell an apartment, then after the unsuspecting customers parted with their hard-earned cash, Tohi would pop up and say they owned nothing, as the apartment belonged to him and not Miguel's. He eventually left Spain in the late 80s, due to the developing relations between the European communities. Moreover, the fact the IRA had nothing better to do, and as they no longer kill the British, they put Tohi on their shit list. 55. Therefore, with a few pounds of the farmers' money as reward, they decided to hunt Tohi, who fled and made his way to Thailand. Accompanied by Miguel, where he set up an export business for arms and ammunition. He stayed in Thailand for 5 years, until police got wind of his operation and their bribes became a constant annoyance to Tohi. Tohi and Miguel therefore left Thailand and settled in Cambodia, at the place they used to visit in order to satisfy his other great passion in life. Tohi was a pedophile. He loved young boys and girls, the younger the better. He loved to savagely pillage their innocence, and it gave him a rush to hear their orifices pop under his large frame. The more they screamed, the more excited he became. He had chosen to settle in Kong, which is only a kilometer away from the notorious K11, which was a small community located 11 kilometers outside of Phnom Penh. It is a pedophile paradise, no questions asked, and Kip, the unofficial headman of K11, knew Tohi and took care of him exceedingly well. Kip would phone Tohi when a new, young, lost waif would wander into the village. He would go to Tohi's house with the frightened youngster in tow. He would be let in by Miguel and given some money, usually $10. Tell Mr. Andrew, Kip is his good friend and will take good care of him, Kip always said. The door would then be closed and, while Kip waited outside, the young boy or girl would be taken to a large room. Here a bloated mass of blubber, which was Andrew Tohi, would be waiting on his bed. The bedroom door would be closed behind the frightened youngster and, after usual 30 minutes of squealing and grunting from the room, the tearful youngster would emerge, their blood-stained clothing replaced with a small silum, type of sarong. They would then be pushed out of the door where Kip would be waiting, lifted onto the back of his motorbike and driven away in tears, shock written on their young faces. 56. This was where Dam had lived now for 7 years. He started as Tohi's fighter, and entered into many fights, which he always won and always damaged or killed his opponents. He was ruthless, and his fearsome reputation soon grew. He was driven by hate. After 3 or 4 years he had outlived his usefulness to Tohi, as nobody would fight him, he was too good, and no fights meant no gambling, therefore no money. Tohi therefore arranged for 2 Cambodians to kill Dam. They were local hoodlums, who bragged they were also assassins. One night after Dam had dispatched another opponent who, although he knew of Dam's reputation, had fought him out of desperation for money. Meanwhile, the 2 would-be assassins waited outside the arena for Dam, who usually ran home. They ambushed him brandishing pistols and daggers. Dam sent them to the afterlife with lightning speed and then ran home. Tohi and Miguel were both shocked to see Dam walk through the door, and Dam had been a little surprised at them not coming to his fight. Tohi inquired what happened, as he appeared to have blood on him. Both Tohi and Miguel spoke Cambodian, although not fluent. Dam relayed the story, announced the blood was not his, sat down, and told Tohi his previously untold story about his life in Salaburi, his training, and the holy remnants. Dam had become useful again. Tohi, after all, had many enemies and Miguel was getting old. Dam felt the pickup slowing down as they approached Phnom Penh, and sights became familiar as night closed in. Good, he thought, less conspicuous. He would have to find himself some normal clothes. The pickup driver had agreed to take him to Phnom Penh Center and to one of his old fight stadiums where he still kept some clothes. Although now he never fought on a regular basis, he still kept his hand in from time to time and trained the odd fighter, in return for some, usual half, of their 57 small purse, if they'd won, or he would give them another beating, if they lost, and survived. He had a small locker space that he kept a shabby tracksuit in. This would do until I get home, he thought, and laughed at himself because he had prepared and planned for everything, except a change of civilian clothes. The pickup stopped outside what appeared to be a large wooden warehouse. Dam jumped off the back of the truck and thanked the driver, blessed him, and then chuckled to himself for blessing someone. Dam went into the boxing arena and walked over to his locker space. His tracksuit had gone, so he took a pair of jeans and t-shirt that had been left lying around and went outside. It was hot and sticky. He had no money, but he hailed a moto taxi, same as a Thai bike taxi with a large square seat at the rear. The moto taxi headed off along the potholed Cambodian road toward Koh Kong. Tohi was happy to see him, overjoyed in fact. He knew what his pet assassin had for him, or hopeful had, which was a cool $1,000,000 worth of history. Miguel let Dam in and paid the taxi. Tohi was sitting behind his large Mustat teak desk. "Have you got it? Have you got it?" asked an impatient Tohi. "Yes, my friend," announced Dam, and put down his bundle of robes and reached into one of the tunic pockets, and produced the small golden jewel-encrusted box and placed it down in front of Tohi. "Excellent, excellent," said Tohi as he leaned over, and picked up a digital camera. He took several photographs of the relic, and then opened a large safe at the side of his desk, and placed the relic on top of several wads of dollars. He closed the safe and locked it with a key, which he then placed onto a chain hung around his neck. "Okay," he said to Dam and Miguel, it looks like you two will be going on a holiday. I will email the photo off to our 58 good friend Mohammed, he said with a sarcastic glint in his eye. He would be waiting for this. Damn, go and freshen up, we will go celebrate. Okay, Andrew. Damn said. Damn knew that Tohi's celebration meant that he would be going to K11 to bring back a child, and, while Tohi would be satisfying his sick lust, he and Miguel would be waiting and listening. He decided that once he had got back from K11, he would slip away on his motorbike to the Heart of Darkness, a large nightclub in Phnom Penh. He would have money in his pocket, and, if Fida was there, he would give her a night she wouldn't forget in a hurry. He walked over to his room, went inside and looked around at the table and his few possessions. His steel sword, made in the image of his old wooden one, and his glaive, which he had spent hours creating. He unfolded his bundle, hung up his homemade robe, washed the dried blood and spinal fluid off his patu, and replaced it on its stand. He took out his folded S16 respirator, having already dumped the filter into the jungle, a long way from the village, and put it in a drawer. He looked down at the table, which had several sheets of a brown cardboard material placed on it, along with several containers that contained various colored powders, and jars containing syrupy solutions. You taught me too well, my brother, he said aloud, as if talking straight to heaven and Jin, too well. Remorse again crept in as he recalled seeing his brother Jin dying in a cloud of swirling smoke. Getting to the village unnoticed had been easy. He had spent weeks preparing, planning and making cyanide flares, something Jin had taught him. He recalled how one day Jin, now a new warrior, had spoken to him. 59. Look at this, my brother, Jin said, and produced a hard brown candle-shaped object. What is it? Asked the inquisitive Dam. I will show you and teach you how to make one, said the excited Jin. Jin and Dam headed off into the mountains to a small cave that they had found. Jin removed the contents of his tunic pocket and laid them on a flat rock at the mouth of the cave. It was early afternoon, and the time when the monks were given leisure time, or meditating time, as it was the hottest part of the day. On the rock Jin had laid out two small round clay containers, a seed root, an aruna root, and several small roll-ed conical shaped object, resembling a cigar. Jin unrolled the cigar-shaped objects out into sheets, which was yellow-brown sandalwood, which resembled oily marzipan. Are you teaching me how to make essence sticks? Asked Dam. Not exactly, replied Jin. He then explained that the contents of the jars were crushed graphite and sulfur. He poured this powder in the center of the laid out sheet, and squeezed the mixed root syrupy juices over the powder, which instantly hardened. He then tightly rolled the sheet, like a hand-rolled cigarette, and put the object in the sun to bake dry. Jin sat down with Dam and informed him that it was a Pinon sleeping stick. However, he did not fully understand what they were used for. I just know, said Jin with a menacing grin, they're deadly. Although when Jin found out exactly what the sticks were used for, he never mentioned it to Dam again. However, there was no need to, as Dam later figured it out and improved on the stick by the addition of graphite and cyanide crystals. 60. Pinon or sleeping sticks were an effective tinja tool. Although death came slowly, it came peaceful. Why? It was the easiest method for the monks in ancient times to dispatch their duties, as buying essence sticks from monks was considered lucky. which was the rumor spread by the monks, possibly the tinju. The victim would light the stick. The top 2 or 3 inches would burn like normal essence stick, and it gave off a pleasant fragrant aroma. The heat would then hit the mix and the aroma would change slightly, although remain pleasant, and the victim would be unaware that they were slowly being murdered. After a few moments of the mixture burning, the victim would fall asleep, and, as they continued to inhale the poison-filled air, their muscles would become paralyzed, lungs, heart, and final brain. The same effect as thiopentone, used as an anesthetic, and potassium chloride, used to stop the heart. The mixture had to be careful why prepared. If there was too little aruna and graphite, the victim would wake up but remain paralyzed, making for a very unpleasant death. Nevertheless, sometimes requested by the ruler if he did not like someone. If too little skeet roots, the organ paralysis would not occur, leaving the victim just in a deep sleep for a few days. The mixture that Dam cooked up, although resembled the monk's deadly essence sticks, he had developed his for instant death. Dam recounted how he made it to the village on the morning of December 4th. He knew what time the relic would be removed. He had hidden in his engine's secret cave until nearer the time. He went around the rocks to the mouth of the cave, making sure he made no noise, and waited behind an outcrop of rocks. He saw Samja, the Prime Master, come from the small hatchway of the meditation room and approached the guards, who bowed their heads on his arrival. He went to the golden gates, opened them, and went inside. The 2 hooded guards turned in toward 61. The cave. One monk went inside with Samja, while the other stood and watched the 2. Like a leaping panther, Dam launched himself silently at the remaining monk, placed his hand over his mouth and inserted his patu into the base of the guard's skull, engaged the catch, and twisted. It was over in a fraction of a second. He then silently removed the body. He knew the Prime Master would be chanting within the cave. Therefore he had plenty of time. He removed the dead monk's bow and placed it on his shoulder. He had rehearsed this many times and it had gone to plan. He only hoped that his size would not be noticed. However, he thought it would be all right, as they would all have their heads bowed. The Prime Master and the other guard came to the mouth of the cave and walked past the now hooded Dam, who joined on at the rear. They entered the temple and started the ceremony. Dam had gone unnoticed and easily replaced the harmless aromatic incense sticks. Now back home in Kokong, he wallowed in his success. That was easy, thought Dam. Now I'll respect for his old idols had gone. He was better than Tinju, and he had in one hit kill Ed. Them all. The only ones left, he thought, were either too old, or too young. The Tinju were finished. He had annihilated them, and they would not have a clue. He sniffed the air and said aloud, "Ah, smells good, the sweet smell of success." His gloating was short-lived, as a bellowing Tohi interrupted his thoughts. "Damn, Miguel, come here." Tohi hollered. Miguel and Dam went into the living room. Tohi had a beaming smile on his face. "Good news?" asked Miguel. "Perfect," said Tohi. "I emailed the photos off to the sheik, who got back to me straight away. He was extremely 62 keen to get the relic and is sending out his aide, Abdul Razid, and you will go to meet him in Thailand. He will email with the details later, but he will be arriving on the 16th. I want you to there at least 2 days prior, so that will give you 5 days for your hair to grow back." Tohi and Miguel both laughed. Dam felt some stubble that had grown back on his head, and joined in the laughter. "Come on," said Tohi, "let's celebrate. Pop along to K11. Dam and see what Kip has available, there's a good lad." Asterisk sniff kiss. Thai people tend to put their lips and nose to a person and sniff in loudly through the nose. This is a sign of affection between Thais as opposed to a normal kiss. Westerners affectionately know this as a sniff kiss. Now, with Western influences they tend to kiss more the Western way, but usual why only in West Earnest tourist towns and cities such as Pattaya. 63. Chapter 5. The village of Salaburi was like a ghost town. The villagers had remained in their wooden stilted houses, and the monks had stayed in their living quarters or meditation room, all unsure of their future. Pon had left the previous evening and, with him, not only went the hopes and honor of the Tinju, but also the soul of the village. Even the jungle was silent. It was usually full of the noise of birds and insects. It was as if the world had stood still on this hot afternoon. The soldiers were in the monks' training area. They had made themselves a rough mahjong set and tried as best they could to occupy themselves. The batteries on their GPS and tracker systems had gone flat and, with no electricity in the village, there was no way to get life back into their only contact with the outside world. Vichy was sitting alone in the lotus position. He pondered in his dark world about the events of the past few days and his time as a prime master. He considered that he should have handled the situation with Dam a lot better. He remembered at the time he may have been a little sharp with the lad, but he had problems of his own as his sight started to fail. This must have been Lord Buddha's will, he thought. Besides, I have seen more beauty and wonder than most men ever get to see. With his already heightened other senses, his loss of sight had never encumbered him. Maybe young Dam was right all those years ago, he thought. Why can't they earn a place in the scheme of things? Maybe it is better to have someone who wants to be a Tinju, than not to have a choice. Lord Buddha after all never 64. Created the Tinju, men did, and he recalled the comment he had made to Dam about no man being able to change this, which might have been presumptuous, and maybe now, man will have to change the Tinju, who in effect were now finished. The silence was suddenly and violently broken. The tops of the trees shook and swayed, with clouds of dust being thrown up in large whirlwinds of rotor wash. A Sikorsky S-92 helicopter roared over the treetops and the wad. It came in low, and flared into a hover above the grounds behind the wad. The soldiers cowered as the pieces of their game flew away. The pilot lowered the CO active and, with a deafening roar, the helicopter gently touched down. The pilot cut the engines, and the noise diminished slightly and the giant rotor blades came to a slow idle. And then stopped. The soldiers hurriedly got to their feet, straightened their combat fatigues and rushed over toward the helicopter. The commotion had brought the villagers scurrying out of their dwellings and they walked toward the shiny white and gold monster from the sky. Most of the villagers had never seen a car, let alone a helicopter, as they never left the village. Only the remaining elder monks had seen any form of motor transport. And that was only one time a year, whilst making the journey to Bangkok, but aircraft they had never seen. Senate assisted Vichy and they, and all the other monks headed toward the helicopter, weapons in hand. The Sikorsky S-92 is a large helicopter used by the Thai Air Force to transport small amounts of troops and supplies. This Particular helicopter was certainly not regular, shining white. It was adorned in gold leaf with the Thai royal standard skillful crafted and a high glazed wax that made it sparkle like a new pin. In the sunlight, the side door slid opened and 6 heavily armed soldiers jumped onto the field, taking up a defensive stance around the 65 helicopter. 6 elder monks behind Vichy and Senet raised and arrowed their bows. Vichy and Senet stopped about 50 meters away. "Wait," called out Senet to the monks. The 5 village soldiers came around the helicopter, and the master sergeant ordered his men to form a small rank, as one of the helicopter soldiers barked an order to the master sergeant, who saluted and shouted an order to the other 4. The soldiers all lowered their weapons and an officer looked inside the helicopter and spoke. The 11 soldiers formed 2 lines either side of the sliding doors and faced outwards. The monks stood their ground still poised to shoot. A few moments later, a figure emerged from the helicopter. He wore a smart white, crisply pressed uniform, with gold braid and a thick golden sash with red tassels. His epaulets showed no rank, but had large pointed helmet crests on them. He looked over at the monks who had started to walk slowly over. They met about 10 meters from the helicopter. The figure gave a long respectful way to the 2 elder monks. "Senet, return the way." "Good afternoon, Kun Senet," said the figure. "Good afternoon, Kun Taksin," replied Senet. Senet introduced Vichy to Taksin, who noticed that the old monk was blind. "I have someone I would like you to meet," said Taksin and looked over at the helicopter. 2 more soldiers emerged, dressed in traditional Thai guards clothing, with elegantly carved golden helmets that tapered off to a point. They removed a small step ladder and placed it at the foot of the helicopter. A figure emerged wearing a royal blue color suit and wire-rimmed spectacles. A gasp went around the now gathered villagers and they all knelt down with heads bowed, as did the monks and Taksin. This figure they all knew. Every home in Thailand had a picture. 66. Of King Bhumipal. The 78-year-old king, currently the world's longest reigning monarch. The king walked over to the 2 monks and Taksin, and asked them to rise. They stood up and the king spoke to them for a few minutes and then the 4 headed into the wat, leaving the remaining monks and villagers in awe. The party remained in the wat for several hours in deep discussion, only being disturbed by young monks taking in fresh fruit and water. The villagers remained in situ hoping for another glimpse at their beloved king. They discussed the atrocity that had happened. The king and Vichy discussed the next stage. The king laid out his thoughts and plans and asked Vichy and Senet to accompany him to Bangkok to talk more and formulate a mutual beneficial plan. Although fearful of getting into the sky monster, they readily accepted. They emerged from the wat and headed toward the helicopter. Vichy vomited as he got to the door of the beast, and was given a drink of cool water. The king, Taksin, and the monks boarded the helicopter, followed by the soldiers, which included the 5 in the village, much to their relief. The pilot engaged the engines and turbines. The helicopter growled to life. Taksin explained to Senet that his investigations had uncovered very little. He said his friend had called him the previous night, who thought he had seen a Thai monk in a boxing stadium in Phnom Penh. He did not know if it was relevant, and he had already relayed the message to someone named Pon, and told them. He said he was a Tinju and recited the Tinju motto. "I presumed that he was one of yours," said Taksin. Senet looked shocked. "Pon," he asked. "Yes," said Taxon. He called me during the early hours. From a mobile phone. I do not give out my number. Only a few. 67. People know it, you being one of them, although I am not sure. That PON understood. It became hard to hear him, because I think he was talking through the earpiece. The large helicopter's rotors threw up swirling clouds of dust and debris, which sent the villagers into a panic, and drowned out the conversation between Taxon and Senate. The pilot set the throttles and watched his instruments. With the dial indicators in position, he looked around for any obstacles or debris that might get blown into the intake. It was all clear, so he gently raised the CO active and the big bird rose off the ground. The pilot, using his rudder pedals, aimed the helicopter at a clump of trees in the jungle, and pushed the cyclic stick forward. The nose of the helicopter dipped, moved forward, accelerated, and gaining speed and height, cleared the jungle canopy and disappeared out of view. 68. Chapter 6. Nick had a restless night. He had bought back the woman he had drooled over at the bar in front of Champion A Go-Go. He had managed to wangle a freebie after he drunkenly argued with the mamazan he left alone, without paying the bar fine. He accompanied Spock and Lek, and, as the three walked down the street, they were caught up with by Vaughn, who said, "My Penry, never mind," she said, "no problem, bar closed. Now I go with you, no bar fine." Nick, who was wankered, slurred good, and the four got on a moto taxi and went to their hotel and up to their rooms. Nick's interest in Vaughn had waned. She was fairly old and unattractive, and he did not want to pay her for sex, a waste of money he thought, and gave her 20 baht for a taxi, and told her to leave. She mumbled something in Thai, stormed out and slammed. He showered. The cold water felt good on his now stinging sphincter. He felt between his butt cheeks, the hairs had been scorched off and he could feel blisters had started to form. This will sting, he thought. He was right, and he spent the night tossing and turning in bed. At times he went and administered ice to this rather sore area. Nick had eventually nodded off around daybreak. A loud hammering thump on the door woke him up. "Are you awake, matey? It's 5 o'clock. "Yeah, Spock," he said, "come in." A large cheery-faced Spock entered his room. "That's a bit dangerous leaving your door unlocked," said a concerned Spock. 69. "No," said Nick, "it's okay." Nick thought for a moment about his door and the damage Spock's thumping could do. "Don't knock next time, just tap and walk in," said Nick. They talked about the events of the previous night, which Spock found difficult to believe or fully take it in. Spock told Nick that Stu was in his room, but did not know who with. He explained. He'd woken Stu well over an hour ago, and had just spoke to him again through the door, but he said that he was in the middle of doing something and mentioned that he was on his vinegar stroke, so had told him to go away. Spock inquired about Vaughn, and Nick told him that he'd paid her and sent her away, although not mentioning he only paid 20 baht. Nick inquired about Lek. Spock explained she had to go to work. She started in the bar at 6 p.m. and wanted to shower and change. "I told her I would see her later," said Spock. "And will you?" inquired Nick. "Unlikely," she was a sturdy shag, but a bit of a horror. Nick laughed and said, "You're learning, mate, there are plenty more, now sod off. While I get dressed. I'll meet you in reception." At 6 o'clock, they all met up in the hotel reception. Nick, Spock and Stu, who was the last to arrive, arm in arm with Deo. The other two looked at them. They had seen Deo at the bar, reading, but hadn't paid much attention to her. So, thought Spock, that's where the little bugger disappeared to, and that's why he acted so strange. The daft twat has gone and fallen in love. He looked at his longtime friend, who beamed from ear to ear. What happened? Asked Spock. 70. Stu explained he had no idea, and he went on to give details of how he remembered leaving the Happy World bar and couldn't get Deo out of his mind. He vaguely remembered the go-go, and the next thing he remembered was when he woke up next to Deo. Then, after he came around a bit, they showered together, and made mad passionate love. Deo spoke a little English, but the words she would use to describe what they did was not mad passionate love, but a damn wild boom boom, shag. Stu wanted to keep Deo, but was unsure how. He asked Nick, who explained he must pay a bar fine of 200 baht for every night he took her away from the bar. Stu thought this a little seedy, as this was love, and not just a fling, but gave Deo 200 baht to go pay the bar. She wanted to go change and shower again in her room. Nick told Stu they would see her at her bar later. She can't go anywhere with anyone else because the bar has been paid. And added, she's been reserved. Stu kissed Deo goodbye and told her that he would see her later. The other two looked at each other and smiled. The lads headed into the hot sticky night air. It was 6:30 p.m. and had started to get dark. They stopped at a clothes shop, and Stu and Spock bought some vests and shorts. Spock bought some thick camel shorts, which both Stu and Nick thought he would be too hot wearing. They ate at an outdoor restaurant, ordering a full English breakfast. Although late, it was their first meal of the day and the first real food they had since they ate on the plane the previous day, apart from the street barbecue, which Stu had thought had given him rather loose stools. The shits now fed, they changed into their new clothes back at the hotel and decided to go explore this magical place some more, before they met up with Deo at the Happy World bar. Stu already missed Deo. It had been almost 2 hours since he last saw her. They made their way to Swatu, a lively swat, situated at the top end 71 of North Pattaya. There were about 50 bars in a covered area, many with live music. The lads settled in one bar that had a band, which consisted of 3 Thais who blasted out a not too bad version of I Shot the Sheriff. They ordered Singa beer and settled in. They were a little bored with the taste of beer, having sunk copious amounts the previous night. However, they forced it down. They moved around Swatu for a few hours, now juiced and groping the happy bar girls, en masse behind, and in front of the many bars. Every time Stu or Spock took out a pair of breasts out from a giggling girl's bra, they would buy them a drink. Nick, they noticed, however, kept his hands well away from his wallet. Having a great time, they soon crept up to spannered state. They came across a quiet bar and, although it had many girls, it was not as noisy as the others. They sat down and Stu could see Spock with his time for the trick face on. That's why he bought thick cotton shorts, thought Stu. Sure enough, true to form, Spock made his way off his stool and positioned himself on one of the small chairs around the bar. The girls who had been talking to the lads, and other girls around the bar with their foreign companions, Al watched as Spock got into his position, legs up, lighter ready. He felt his methane supply bubbling, and gave one good push. He furrowed his brow for extra push power. A look of relief, followed by horror, came across Spock's large face. He put his legs down, put the lighter back on the table and, with a nonchalant look, picked up his drink. No flames, no entertainment, nothing. The people looked puzzled and went back to their conversation. And drinks? Spock looked bemused and shocked. Stu got off his stool and went over to his large friend. What happened, mate, and what is that awful smell? Then Stu realized what had happened. 72. Nick leaned back on his stool and asked. Lads, shall we start on the shorts? I am fed up with beer. Yes mate, order me a vodka and coke, said Stu, and tried to keep a straight face as he continued. And make Spock's a size XXL, he has shit in his. Stu then fell about laughing. Spock was embarrassed and looked at his old friend in tears of laughter on the floor and said, Yes matey, very funny, now get up, and go buy me some new ones. Never trust a fart in Thailand. Now getting quite late, the now spannered lads headed for the Happy World bar. Spock in his new shorts, he had changed and cleaned up in the toilets. Best 5 baht I've spent, he thought, the cost for using some public conveniences. While they waited for Spock, Stu noticed a hotel, with a large sign that read Sabai Land Body Massage. It was on a corner of Swatu, which made it look a little out of place. What's that? He asked Nick. With a smirk, Nick informed him that it was a soapy massage place and they could go tomorrow. They reached the Happy World bar, the girls all hooped at them. Welcome Nick, welcome Spock, they all looked at Stu. And laughed. Hello Stu. Deo was sitting behind the bar reading her book. She saw Stu and stood up, fetched them drinks over and then she went to sit next to Stu. What happened last night? Stu asked Deo. 73. You don't remember, said Deo smiling. No, said Stu, all I know is that I got you, and pecked Deo on the forehead. Better you don't remember, stupid man, she said and smiled. Deo was 22 years old, and like most bar girls in Pattaya had been lured there with the dreams of finding a foreigner to take care of her and her family. Many bar girls are country girls. Usually from the Isan region, a poor area in northeast of Thailand. Most had children. Deo, being no exception, had a baby son. The girls usually went to the tourist area, where they could find bar work, leaving their children. This is the Thai way. They usually come with hard luck stories of their child's father, who would have either been a drunk, taking drugs, or a butterfly, someone who went from girl to girl. Many of these stories are untrue, but told in order to get a foreigner to send money for them. Many of the girls would have several foreign men sending money, which they shared with their friends and, maybe current Thai boyfriend. This is again, the Thai way. Western society consider this as degrading and believe they are forced into this life, and are being exploited, and yes, probably some were. Nevertheless, as most bar girls will tell you, they earn good money, can take care of their family, party every night, get a shag, and get paid for it, and to a Thai, sex is just another bodily function. However, they will not go with a man if they don't like him. It was their choice. The girls all stick together, and have many excuses why they cannot go with a particular man. When the girls first come to work the bar, until they have a few farang foreigners under their belt, they were usually shy, until they learn the ropes from the more experienced girls and the mamazan, so at this stage, they have not been corrupted or brainwashed, so sometimes, the lucky ones will be whisked off and get married a foreigner. This happened quite frequently, A. 74. Thai wife, is a loving, loyal, and usual why beautiful partner. Not all. Thai girls are bar girls, they are the minority, most are usual why the same as the Western women, homemakers, doctors, students, teachers etc. However, bar work is a very accepted part of the Thai way of life, which is why many single, and married men come to tourist areas like Pattaya and Phuket. Especially now the buffaloes have all gone. Stu was Deo's second Farang experience. Her first was an old German man. Mamazan had told her that the older they are, the better. Can't get it up, she smiled, only want some company. And usually fall asleep, a real catch. Deo, having been at the bar now for 2 weeks, had seen the foreign men come and go, and she was no longer afraid of the large foreign invaders. She decided it would be okay to go with Kurt. Deo got her bag and went around to the other side of the bar. Kurt bought her drink after drink, which was good for the bar because she only drank orange juice which Kurt paid 120. Bought a glass, of which Deo got a cut of a lady drink usual white 20. But Kurt looked about 80 years old, and appeared a lot older than her granddad. By the time they left the bar, Kurt was well wankered. They got back to the room and, as Mamazan had told her, he went off into a loud snoring slumber. The old man awoke in the morning, gave Deo 1,000 baht, which would have been 2 weeks' salary in her village, picking rice. She showered and left, easy money, she thought, and never saw Kurt again. Her second experience was now with Stu, and was not so easy. She had noticed Stu, and liked the look of this odd-shaped man. With a nice smile. He'd left the bar with his friends but returned later and made a terrible noise that Charlie said was a foreign song and, with a 75 rose in his mouth he went behind the bar, grabbed a rather bemused-looking Deo, asked the boss to play a record that had been played earlier, Wonderful Tonight. Stu twirled and serenaded Deo for 10 minutes, before he'd collapsed into a chair, and like a fat novelty Buddha statue, he fell asleep, occasional why waking up and continuing with his song. Charlie's wife, the Mamazan, asked Deo if she liked him. Deo thought hard and looked at the heap in the chair. Yes, she said, he makes me laugh. Well, take him home and take care of him, ordered Mamazan. They knew which hotel Stu was staying, he was Nick's friend. And Nick always stayed at the Sawashdi. They bundled Stu in a taxi and Deo took him to his room. Stu started to sober up a bit. So she put him in the shower and turned the water cold, at which point he shook himself, looked at Deo naked in the shower. Along with him, pointed at her and slurred. You're lovely, a stupid drunken grin then came over his face. He got out of the shower, flopped onto his bed and promptly fell asleep, still drooling. The next day they awoke, and Deo expected to be paid and go back to the bar. She never expected anyone actual why found her attractive. Many Thai women think this, as they see models on TV wearing makeup and on catwalks or in movies. They believe all foreign women are beautiful, and Thai humbly think they are ugly. It was a pleasant surprise that Stu had told her he wanted to keep her, although he wasn't sure how, but he would find out. And he wanted to keep her forever. This made her feel happy. Deo quite liked this funny little man. She enjoyed her first real snog, and sex was no different to that of a Thai man, it just took longer and not usual why 3 times, but she enjoyed it and maybe The novelty would wear off as Mamazan said it usually did. 76. Now in the Happy World bar. Stu had decided to go home early. After he and Deo had finished their drinks, Spock and Nick decided to head off to a go-go in SWA 7 and search for the lucky woman who was going to get a damn good rattling that night. Spock knew what kind he wanted for that evening and she would have to be sturdy. He was in the mood. Stu had asked Nick if they were going to see that place, Sabai Land. Nick said very elated oh yes, but was shocked when Stu asked if Deo could come, whereupon he said a firm, oh no. The next morning Spock was woken by a knock on the door. It was Stu wanting to know if he was going for some breakfast. He said he would meet him downstairs. Spock got his bearings. He had a strange taste in his mouth. He moved his tongue and felt something odd, and he pulled out a small thin serrated leg. How did that get there? He said. Once again he was wankered. He looked over at the figure laid next to him and nudged it. Lek turned over and saw Spock holding up the leg. She rolled over, taking a bag from under the bed, and presented Spock with a half-eaten bag of fried locusts. Nick had another sleepless night. He'd lost Spock in SWA 7. And had once again returned alone. Never mind, he thought. Luann would be here later and maybe my arse will have stopped hurting. Luann was between boyfriends, one had just gone back and another was due out in a few days. Nick had known Luann several months and had been with her several times. He had called her on the off chance that she was free and she arranged to come later and spend a day and night with him. Luann liked Nick, but he never paid as much as her other men, so he was a stopgap every now and again. This arrangement suited them both. 77. They all met in the reception at around noon. Stu and Deo had already eaten. Stu mentioned that Deo wanted to go to her room as her friend had returned from her home village and she wanted to see her, which would give the lads a chance to go to Sabai Land and take a look. Deo's friend, Mu, had not been home. She had been with her boyfriend. Mu had come to work in the bar with Deo. Mu had taken to bar work, like a duck to water, and, whereas Deo had been timid and shy around the men, Mu was outgoing, spoke and flirted in broken English with everyone. She had been taken her first night and every night since. Her latest conquest, an Englishman, had taken her for a week and took her to stay in Jamshan, a beach resort about 10 kilometers from Pattaya, which is much less raucous. The Englishman had left during the early hours of the morning to fly home, so Mu would be back in the room she shared with Deo. Deo wanted to see her friend and tell her about Stu, also see what trophies and gifts Mu had acquired this time, gold and mobile phones being the preferred items. Although Mu was not beautiful unlike Deo, she was cute and outgoing, and men loved this. Lek and Deo left the hotel together in the mid-afternoon, and the lads headed to Sabai Land and entered the swish-looking hotel. Stu and Spock had been looking forward to a massage, as both of them had aching backs from too much shagging. They imparted this information to Nick, who smirked. The reception area of Sabai Land was huge. It had a bar on one side and several tables set out around the floor area, and a large flat window on the other side. Behind this window sat very elegantly dressed Thai women, about 20 in all. It looked like a giant fish tank. The lad sat down and ordered a coffee. The 78 women wore small badges with numbers written on, and Nick explained. These are the air masseuses, he smirked. A smartly dressed-looking Thai man came over to their table. "Which one would you like, sir?" directing his question at Spock. "Hang on, matey," said Spock, "we're just looking." The man backed away. The lads spent several more minutes observing the women. Spock had noticed a large woman sat on the back row. "She'll do," he thought, "she would be able to give me a good sorting out." He called the Thai man back over. "Give me number 34. The Thai man explained the price was 1,800 baht for 90 minutes. The man went to the fish tank and called out number 34 and number 26 for Stu. Nick said he would go later, which did not surprise Stu or Spock, as they had realized that Nick was even thriftier than Stu. The pair were taken up into very smart rooms that more than justified the price. Spock's room was next door to Stu's. Spock noticed even though there was a large bed and an even larger round bath. There wasn't a massage table. There was, however, a large inflatable bed propped up near the bath. The woman went over to the bath and turned on the taps. She went over to the confused Spock and motioned the removal of his clothes and handing him a towel. She went over to the bath and carried on with the filling, checking the water was not too hot or too cold. Spock stood in his towel and she called him over. When the bath was full, she told Spock to get in. She then undressed and got in, facing the big lad, taking some soap from the liquid container at the side of the bath. She gently caressed the foam sensual Y over 79. Spock's body from head to toe, marvelous, he said, blissful Y. After he had been thoroughly bathed, she stood up. Spock looked at her Amazonian figure. He'd never imagined ties come in XXL sizes too. The woman put the airbed on the floor and motioned Spock to lay on it. He did as instructed, and the lady opened the top of a large squeezy bottle, squeezing its oily contents onto Spock and herself. She then lay down on top of Spock, rubbing her body along and up and down Spock's back. After several minutes of this, she rolled Spock over and noticed that she had done a pleasurable job, as a large proboscis was stood firmly to attention. She repeated the process on his front and listened to Spock cooing. He was happy, she thought. After a few minutes of this performance, she pulled a weak-kneed Spock to his feet, flopped him onto the bed, placed a condom on his erect member and proceeded to give him the most sensual blow job he had ever had. A few moments later, she replaced the condom, after she had done her job too well and now had to attempt to bring life back into the now flaccid tool. This didn't take her long. She mounted Spock, gyrating and thrusting herself rapidly up and down. Spock soon deposited his second spoonful of man fat. She then took him back to the bath and bathed him again. They went back over to the bed and turned on the wall-mounted TV. She patted the space next to her, and Spock lay down beside her. 45 minutes had passed, and not a word had been spoken between them, mainly because it was a boring routine for her and Spock was too gobsmacked and blissful to speak. They lay down and watched an in-house porn movie, and then in a very soft feminine voice she whispered, "If you want to go again, it'll cost you more money." The phone in the room buzzed to signal 90 minutes. The woman and Spock both got dressed and made their way back to the reception, to where Nick and a smiling Stu waited. Stu had finished about 2 minutes earlier, and he giggled and cooed like a schoolboy. Spock sat down and looked at Nick. 80. Did you enjoy your first soapy? Nick asked with a smirk. Yep, said Spock, but my back is still sore. They made their way back to the Sawash D Hotel, and popped into a few bars on the way back for an afternoon libation. They arrived back at the hotel early evening and felt squeaky clean. Luann arrived at the hotel earlier and had been waiting for Nick. He introduced her to Stu and Spock, and told them he would meet up with them later in the Happy World bar. He and Luann headed up to his room. Nick was like a dog that had just scented a bitch on heat. Stu and Spock sprayed themselves with mosquito repellent, and headed off for the Happy World bar. On their arrival, Deo sat behind the bar playing Connect 4 with her friend, Moo, and two men sat the opposite side of the bar. Stu and Spock sat down at a table. A bit of jealousy crept in with Stu, but was relieved when Deo got up, went to the fridge and brought over 2 bottles of Singa beer. She kissed Stu and sat down next to him. The 2 men at the bar glared at Stu. Spock returned the stare and the 2 immediately returned to their game. The lady, who was sitting next to Deo and now playing with the 2 men at the bar, kept looking over at the giant sitting with Deo and Stu, and smiled. Spock returned the smile and the woman cheekily stuck out her tongue, and smiled again. Stu and Deo talked, while looking gooey-eyed at each other. Spock had just concluded a deal with a street seller for a fake Rolex Yachtmaster watch. He paid the man and showed his purchase to Stu, who looked, and agreed on it being a fine-looking timepiece. It looked like the real McCoy, said Stu. The 2 men who were at the bar exited, careful to avoid nudging Spock as they scuttled out. Moo came to the table and pecked Spock on the cheek and sat next to him. It was as if she had known him all her life. Deo introduced Moo and Spock. 81. Ordered a drink for her, mostly in order to get her to stop grabbing his slightly tender todger. Moo took the new watch from the table, looked, then looked again and showed Deo. They both spoke in Thai to each other, and Moo turned to Spock. You ting tong, stupid, and started counting using her fingers to demonstrate 1-2-3-5 and holding up 4 fingers. She could see Spock looking confused, so she repeated 1-2-3-5. Spock thought, bless her, she is trying, and said, no, it's 1-2-3-4-5. Moo held the watch up in front of Spock and, exasperated, said, look. Spock looked at the watch, looked at the numbers on the watch. Then realized 1-2-3-5-5. He looked up, and took the watch, put it on the table. Little bastard has ripped me off. It wasn't late when Stu and Deo walked hand in hand back to the hotel. Spock followed with nobody by his side, but a petite Moo hanging around his shoulders like a fox stole. I hope I don't break her, thought Spock. Spock tapped on Nick's room. He had been absent all night. Spock knocked and walked in. Nick and Luann were in bed, watching TV. Spock asked Nick if he was okay and he told them about his watch. He left the room with Luann moaning to Nick about locking his door. Spock returned to his room. Moo was taking a shower. Spock had brought some whiskey at the mini-mart on the way home and poured himself and Moo a glass. The bloody woman drinks like a fish, he thought, remembering she'd kept up with him at the Happy World bar. Moo finished and told him to go take a shower, which he did, mainly to get some cold water on his worn-out todger. 82. He finished showering and got onto the bed, where a naked, smiling Moo was eagerly waiting. I will just give her a quickie, he thought wrong. Spock finished after about 10 minutes, but Moo was having none of it. She wanted a climax. And that was that. With great strength for such a little woman, Mu shunted Spock into position after position, mounting him, and widely thrashing and thrusting herself on his now sore end. Swole and tool, until after about 20 minutes she came. She had broken Spock. He lay there for several moments too worn out to move. Mu sat up and watched a movie and drank her whiskey. Spock looked at Mu. She was cute, he thought, and wow. What a great shag. What can we do now, he thought, as it was only early. Spock had noticed something about Mu that he wasn't keen on. He stroked his head, getting a bit long. His hair was about 2 millimeters long, but he usually liked to feel his scalp. I'll show the cheeky little monkey, he thought. The thunderbolt had struck again. Nick had a great night just relaxing with Luann. She had bought him some flamazine cream, and applied it to his now recovering burn. They talked, made love and chilled out all night, and then they fell asleep holding one another. Morning came and Luann got up and dressed. She had to go to meet her other boyfriend, who was due in later that day. Thai women were good organizers regarding the visits of boyfriends, so they wouldn't clash. Sometimes though, an unavoidable cross of times of visits can take place. The lady tends to take one away, usually the one who sends her the most money, then she will get her friends to tell the other man she has gone home for a few days, baby was sick, being the usual excuse. They usually get away with this, but occasional lose the man to other bar girls. They are never concerned about this as 83. Usual they can be replaced with ease. Moreover, this is an acceptable practice between bar girls, as it is after all a business. You never lose your girl, you only lose your turn. Nick felt a bit sad at Luann's departure, but at least it's free, he thought. He got out of bed and went over to the small window next to his door. The corner rooms have a patio door that leads out onto a balcony and a small window that was about the same size as a normal window in the UK. This window opened inwards and looked out onto the hotel entrance and small courtyard. Nick leaned out of the window and watched Luann get on a bus. Nick wished he earned more money. Although he did work in London, it was only for a few weeks a time to earn money to come to Thailand, about 6 times a year. He subsidized his money by selling counterfeit goods, which he bought in Pattaya. The arrangement he had with Luann was okay, but he would like a more permanent relationship. A loud rap on the door, followed by Spock bursting in with a big grin on his face, violently interrupted Nick's thoughts. Morning, matey. Stu, Deo, and Mu were sat on the bed in Stu's room. Mu had been explaining about the previous night with Spock, sometimes speaking in Thai, when she did not want Stu to know the details. She started speaking in her broken English, explaining they had just had sex. Spock got out of bed and produced a Remington rechargeable razor. He went to the bathroom and asked Mu to shave his head, even though she had trouble reaching around his massive frame. When she had finished, he thanked her, then removed the towel she had wrapped around herself and tugged at her pubic hair. Spock had not liked this because it was only a small but long tuft of hair, and he liked either a nice bush, or nothing. She was to have nothing, and off came the tuft. Stu and Doe laughed, but Mu said she didn't like it because it itched. 84. Spock entered the room and joined the other three and knew what they were laughing about, and said, "She won't be cheeky again, or next time the hair on her head would fall victim to the Remington." "Is Nick coming for some breakfast?" inquired Stu. "I don't know, mate. I went to his room, his door was unlocked, but he wasn't there, explained Spock. He might have been seeing off Luan, she's going today. Continued Stu. Oh yeah, that's right, but he's stupid leaving his door. Unlocked, said Spock. They laughed and joked some more. Stu had not seen his old friend so happy and contented in many years, and, as Spock and Moo went on, he felt like he was watching a comedy. Stu knew Spock had become, like him, smitten. Deo went to the balcony to hang out the towels when she noticed a commotion down below. Come look, she said. The three joined her on the balcony and noticed people gathering around a white Toyota Hiace van used as an ambulance. With its back door open, a nurse dressed in a white uniform escorted a hobbling male figure up to the vehicle. The man appeared to be supporting his arm gingerly and, as he got to the rear door of the ambulance, stopped, looked up at the balcony and gave Spock a contemptuous glare. What's Nick doing down there? Asked Stu. 85. Chapter 7. The brightly lit stadium was full to capacity with people shouting, and large amounts of money changed hands. As Cambodians and Thais jumped up and down on small tatty wooden benches in order to get a better view of their fighter. They cheered every time the man, who they had bet on, scored a punch on his opponent. Two fighters stood in the center of a makeshift ring lined with sand, which was splattered in blood. Their hands were covered with a gauze material that blood had seeped through at the knuckles. Both their faces were swollen and bloody as they punched and kicked each other in a ferocious frenzy, with each one trying to kill or maim the other. It was brutal and the crowd loved every moment. One fighter landed an elbow to the side of his opponent's temple, which stunned the other fighter, and allowed blow after blow to be thrown against the now defenseless man's head. He finished him off with a viscous roundhouse kick. The crowd went wild, some cheered, some booed, and yelled at their fighter. To defend himself, this was futile. The man was knocked unconscious by the kick and dropped face first to the floor. The victor raised his hand and chopped at the back of the fallen fighter's neck, to ensure he would not get up. He then stood over the fallen fighter, and waved to the raucous crowd, who had now lost interest. Two men, dressed in shabby jeans and t-shirts, came and dragged the fallen fighter out of the ring and to the back of the stadium. He wasn't dead and would recover and live to fight. 86. Another day, he was one of the lucky ones. Two more fighters made their way into the ring and stood at the ringside while the sand got raked over. The victor walked around the audience, trying to get a tip from the crowd of people. He had put on a good show, and this they were allowed to do in order to subside their meager earnings. Slim pickings tonight, he thought, and, as he was favorite to win, not much money had changed hands against him, so no great winnings meant no great tip. The victorious fighter returned to the changing area, cursing and muttering under his breath with the noise of the next fight ringing in his ears. He took a bowl of water from a large ceramic drum and poured it over his head. The changing area was outside of the basic stadium. It was just a corrugated iron fenced area with a 60-watt light hung over it. The fighters changed and warmed up there, punching and kicking. Sand-filled sacks hung from makeshift beams, their clothes piled up in rows. There was no theft here, usually because they had nothing worth stealing. With the exception being 4 nights ago, when one of the fighters had his clothes stolen. The fighter took another bowl of water and washed the dried blood from his mouth and nose. He spun around and came face to face with a man wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, his head shaven and a rucksack on his back. What do you want? Snapped the fighter. I want to find this man, said Pon, in Cambodian, showing him the charcoal drawing of Dam. Do you know him? The fighter looked at the picture and recognized a young Dam, whom he had known for several years and had fought many times. Dam always came off the victor, but as friendship amongst fighters was rare, Dam had never killed him, only knocked him unconscious on several occasions. Yes, said the fighter and, not asking the reason behind Pon's search, inquired. How much money will you give me? 87. Pon had reached the meeting point in Pongnam Ram Inn. The early hours of the morning, but the food still was closed. He sat down, took the mobile phone from his bag, and switched it on. It peeped into life. He checked that it had a signal and dialed the number on the card given to him by Senate. A sleepy sounding Taxon answered. Hello. Hello, said Pon, my name is Pon and I am. Hello again, said Taxon, unable to hear a response. Pon, realizing Taxon couldn't hear him, tried to call again. Fortunately, one of the still owners went over to see what the noise was and noticed the monk held the phone upside down. The still owner took the phone from him and turned it the right way, and Pon replied to the now agitated hellos from Taxon. Taxon explained that he had a friend in Phnom Penh who worked for the Thai consul and had seen a Thai monk in a boxing stadium a few hours previous. Taxon could not do much, as it was Cambodia and didn't know if the information was relevant. However, it was something, so he gave Pon the location and details. Pon thanked him and declined Taxon's offer of his friend's help. He threw the phone in his bag, and the still owner offered him some food. He accepted, and while the owner cooked, he sat at a bench and looked again at the picture of Dam. It had been a long hard trek for Pon to reach Phnom Penh. He had walked the few kilometers and stopped at the market. Directly in front of the border crossing, he swapped his mobile phone for some jeans, t-shirt and a rucksack from a bemused market trader. He put his robes and other items in his rucksack and tied his sword onto the back. He knew he could not cross the border without papers, so he walked around the back of the market to where a small stream, a tributary of the Mekong River, meandered under a bridge at the border crossing. This was 88. Covered by dense foliage. He waded in and followed the shallow brown water stream for about 6 kilometers until he was in Cambodia and unfamiliar ground. Pon had decided, unlike Dam, to follow the roads to Phnom Penh and stay close to the jungle, in order to rest from the searing afternoon sun. He would travel during the early morning and nighttime, when it was a little cooler, and rest in the afternoon and early evening. Although this was a longer way, it would stop him getting lost in an unfamiliar jungle, as Dam did several times on his way back to Salaburi. Pon decided not to stay on the main roads, instead, take small tracks that ran parallel to the major roads, and he had ran and walked, unlike Dam, who had hitched a ride. During the hot afternoons, Pon stopped in shaded areas of jungle and outcrops of rubber plantations. He would eat the dried food that he had brought with him, and drank the liquefied king cobra liver, mixed with oranges and mango for energy and to quench his thirst. He never slept much, his thoughts often returning to Salaburi, his brothers, his masters, and Dam. On the third afternoon, he removed a gold nugget from his bag. It was a half-finished image of a large winged serpent. He removed a small bundle of craftsman tools, removed the tool he needed and carried on skillfully carving, his mind now empty of past events as he concentrated on his work. Pon had no money, as Salaburi residents had no need for money. Because they grew or killed everything they needed. There were many freshwater streams for drinking, washing and fishing, and as a community they shared everything. The monks and villagers loved to whittle and carve intricate statues from the minerals they found around the village and in the many caves and potholes in the mountains nearby. They sometimes spent years on these small carvings. They were in no rush and not unusual to see 5 or 6 monks sat in a circle talking and whittling at the same time. Pon had decided to bring some of his ornaments 89 with him, thinking that maybe he could use these for trading. After seeing the reaction of the soldier on his mobile phone, Trade thought they may be worth something. He had brought along a finished golden nugget, 2 red stone, 1 blue stone ornaments, and his unfinished gold nugget, which he now worked on. It would give him something to do and occupy his mind. Pon had arrived at the stadium after traveling for 4 days. He knew Dam had a good lead. He hoped that Dam was the monk Taxon's friend had seen, and would still be about somewhere in the area, and hoped someone would know him. It was all he had to go on. He had watched a fight finish and followed the victor to the changing area. He was elated when the fighter said he knew Dam. Pon took out his ornaments from his rucksack. "I don't have any money," he explained, "but I have these. And you can have them if you can tell me anything." The fighter took the objects in his gauze-covered blood-stained hands and stared at them. He noticed the 2 gold nuggets, one transformed into a statue of Buddha, the other and slightly larger one, unfinished. He handed them back to Pon, but kept the 4-inch gold unfinished nugget and said, "His name is Dam and he lives with a man named Andrew Tohi and a Spaniard." He then went on to tell Pon where they stayed, and directions of Kokong and the house. The fighter finished the conversation with a warning for Dam. "Be careful of Tohi, he is a bad man, very dangerous." Pon thanked the fighter and left the stadium, leaving the fighter examining his newfound wealth. 90. Pon got onto the road that the fighter had explained would take him to Kokong and Tohi's house. He knew he would find Dam, and hoped that he still had the relic. He wanted to kill this man to avenge his brothers, to satisfy his own demons that had been burning and eating into his very being for the past week. He wanted this man to pay for the atrocity that ruined his life. And he intended to kill him, and anyone else who stood in his way. He'd planned for Dam to die that night. Pon sprinted along the unlit, potholed roads for 12 kilometers. Asterisk ties are all given ID cards, these stay with them throughout their lives. On these cards are names, date of birth, etc. They are used in everyday life for many things, opening bank accounts, renting apartments, etc., and crossing borders into Cambodia or Burma. They are carried at all times, and the Thai people are fined quite heavily, or imprisoned if caught without them. There are some small villages in Thailand cut off from society. Therefore don't have any need or use for ID cards, Salaburi being one. Many Thai people cross over into Cambodia, to the east of Thailand, or to Burma in the west, mainly for gambling, as gambling in Thailand is illegal. Cambodia and Burma have capitalized on this exodus, and many casinos have sprung up close to main border crossings. These are very smartly built, run mainly by corrupt high-ranking police and organized crime syndicates with American or European investors. Beggars as young as 5 years old walk around outside these casinos in the scorching heat in their droves. They hold up umbrellas, and follow incomers, shading them in order to get one or two bots. Some of the children even carry babies in shabby slings. These newborns are usual Y brother or sister, given by the parents for extra sympathy in their attempt to look the neediest. Phuket on the Cambodian side and Aranyaprathet on the Thailand side are the main crossings, and the most visited border crossing, which leads into the eastern heart of Thailand. 91. Chapter 8. The underground storeroom was a converted wine cellar beneath Tohi's bungalow. It was a vast, racked area, full of weapons, ammunition, and explosives, ranging from Beretta and cold pistols, to SAM surface-to-air missiles with launchers. Tohi sat at his small desk and smiled. He had just got off the phone after speaking with Mohammed, and he felt great. Details had been finalized. Dam and Miguel were on their way with the relic to meet Abdul and get his $1 million. Tohi took a mouthful of his imported Bushmills Irish whiskey. He savored the flavor of the smooth velvety amber fluid as it slipped down his throat. Life is good, he thought. His phone rang and interrupted his euphoria. What does that stupid Arab want now, he thought and answered. His assumption was wrong, it was Kip. Hello, Mr. Andrew. Kip then went on to make small talk, about his health, his business etc. Tohi let him ramble, because he felt that nothing could upset him today. He stared at his racks and drank his whiskey while Kip rambled on, then he stopped suddenly and sat up straight in his chair. What? He asked. 92. Yes, Mr. Andrew, she only came today, 8 years old. Needed a bit of a cleanup, but she would squeal good for sure, said an excited Kip. Tohi now concentrated on the conversation. Bring her straight over, Kip said an excited Tohi. Yes, Mr. Andrew, straight away. Tohi finished his drink and went up a small flight of stairs. Through a small door, which led into the living room of his bungalow. Things cannot get any better than today, he thought. Dam and Miguel were due to meet with Sheikh Mohammed, Del Allah's most trusted aide, Abdul. The meeting was to take place in Pattaya, an area that Tohi knew well from his time living there. Tohi had arranged the meeting for 16th December, when the transaction would take place. Tohi hated Pattaya as he had previously lost a fortune while living there, by having to pay off corrupt police, both for protection of his dubious business dealings, and moreover his sordid personal pleasures. Although it had been many years since he'd lived in Thailand, he had vowed never to return. He had sent Dam and Miguel away that morning, the 13th. He wanted them in Pattaya for the 14th, to give them time to set the meeting point, and give Miguel time to prepare for an extra little task he had assigned him. Miguel and Dam had left early to make the 8-hour drive from Phnom Penh to the border at Phuket. They took the Isuzu D-Max and drove out of the Cambodian capital. They would get to the border that night and stay at one of the many hotels around the border town. Miguel would then walk across the border first thing the next morning. Dam would go across on the back of a load cart. 93. Cambodians are allowed to cross over the border. These were usual why the market traders, who sold their wares at Aranyaprathet, the Thailand side market. The market was quite vast, selling everything cheaply, clothes, ornaments, most things, both legal and illegal, could be bought there. These traders would go across with a small cart, piled high with their wares. Many times higher than the cart, many people would push these barrows and some people sat on top to stop the load from falling off. Dam, having no papers, would have to pay one of the traders to let him travel on top of the load cart. If the police or immigration were to stop them, which rarely or never happened, they would just give them $2. Once across the border, Dam and Miguel would meet up in the market area, where a car that Tohi had pre-arranged from one of his old acquaintances would be waiting. They would then travel the 4 hours from Aranyaprathet to Pattaya. Here they would have a 2-day wait, giving them plenty of time to prepare. Tohi sat behind his large teak desk. He had poured himself another glass of Bushmills and waited the arrival of Kip and his night's entertainment. He played with the safe key hanging around his neck and thought about his new friend Mohammed, who had just made him more wealth, therefore more power. He was satisfied with how he'd managed to con the stupid sheik. Mohammed Del Alaz was rich, obscenely rich, one of the richest men in the world. Not a ruthless or evil man, he had made his money from oil and, like other sheiks, enjoyed the trappings of the wealth that his liquid gold had provided. Mohammed lived with his family in Saudi Arabia. He had a large palace and servants to take care of his every whim. He was a collector, and loved to collect artifacts from other religions. Mohammed's twisted train of thought was that if he possessed some artifact from other gods, or prophets, on his death Allah 94. And the Prophet, Mohammed, would welcome him into heaven with open arms as he would hold other religions' holy artifacts, making his God, Allah, superior to the others. This strange way of thought had already cost him dearly. He had many significant artifacts from religious history. His prized possession was the Holy Grail of Christ. He had paid $2 million for the Grail, from his now good friend Professor Julian Grimes. Mohammed had advertised over the internet for artifacts, and although he'd had many replies, only 2 intrigued him enough to pursue. He had sent his advisors and experts out to check the authenticity of one of the claims and, whether or not it actually existed. The other he knew about was in existence somewhere, that being the Holy Grail. Professor Grimes flew out to Saudi and presented the sheik with the exact location of this long-lost treasure, showing photocopies written in ancient text. The originals, he explained, were not allowed out of their original storage. Grimes laid out his evidence and convinced the sheik he could, with a small deposit for tools and bribes, get hold of the Grail. Grimes arrived at the sheik's palace with a stone block, which was X-rayed immediately upon its arrival, where it was revealed that within the block was the Holy Grail. The stone was then carbon dated and revealed its age, as the good professor had stated. Delighted that he possessed the Grail, he immediately locked the item away in his private vault, convinced that he now owned the symbol that Christians had searched so long to try and find. It was of course an elaborate hoax. Professor Julian Grimes, also known as Mr. John Crawford, who claimed he lived in Cambridge, England, and was a tutor at King's University. Crawford did in fact live in Cambridge. He, however, did not teach. He was an assistant curator at the university's museum. He was also a confidence trickster. Grimes photocopied old books, 95, and maps, and dubiously obtained a chunk from the stump of a column from the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey, which he knew was a building block from the late 10th century. He then took some of his evidence to Saudi and, at Mohammed's palace, convincingly told his story, showing unreadable and some partial damaged papers, and explained that the missing chunks of the originals were the reason Everybody had searched in the wrong place. He went on to explain, the Knights Templar had found the Grail during the 11th century and sealed it into a building block, the same way as the mythical Excalibur was sealed in a rock. The Knights then built it into a pillar within Glastonbury Abbey over 900 years ago, and he knew, pointing to the evidence, the location, within the guarded ruins of the abbey, in the southwest of England. Mohammed excitedly gave him instructions to obtain the Grail. On his return to England, Grimes asked one of the Cambridge art students to make him a wooden model based on what the student thought the Grail might look like. Grimes then employed a stonemason to cut a bung out of his ancient masonry. He then placed the model in the hollow, cemented the model in, cut the removed bung to make a top and sealed it in. The stonemason then scraped a minute hairline crack around the stone, so it looked as if the rock had been split in half to get the Grail in and magically sealed. Grimes then set off a small explosion at the ruins that everyone blamed on a methane gas build-up, and a vagrant being clumsy with his matches. Then he obtained a copy of the article from the local press, which he scanned and emailed to Mohammed, who he told to transfer the remainder of the money to pay off his accomplices. A few weeks later, he arrived at the Sheikah's palace, rock in hand. Grimes appeared terrified and claimed that a radical group of Zionists, who had known about and had been secret guardians of the chalice for millennia, and they now pursued him and had 96 issued death threats. Grimes implored Mohammed never to mention him, or the Grail. The Sheikh bought his tale, and not wanting to get his good friend Professor Grimes into any trouble, locked the Grail away and agreed, and gave his word that he would never divulge anything about the Grail, and gave his oath to keep his silence on the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. Grimes told Mohammed that he also knew the whereabouts of some missing parchments of the * Gnostic Gospels. Excited by this, Mohammed commissioned his new and trusted friend to find this artifact. "Spare no expense, Julian," he would say. "Money no object." Grimes, aka Crawford, explained that they had been buried somewhere in a desert and he was going to head there straight away, to give his fugitive status time to cool, stating that he may be gone for some time. Grimes went to the desert, the Nevada desert, and to accurately pinpoint his location, Caesar's Palace Casino, Las Vegas. Mohammed, pleased with his acquisition, then turned his attention to his next project. His advisors had taken many months that dragged on into years, collecting proof and documentation to support the fact that indeed, such an artifact did exist. He recounted the most recent piece of his information on his computer, which showed a hooded monk who appeared to be outside an ancient temple holding a small golden box. Now, after 3 years, Mohammed dialed the number and a voice at the other end answered in Cambodian. "Hello, could I speak to Mr. Tohi?" Tohi reverted to English. "Tohi speaking." Mohammed introduced himself, and told him that he wanted the Buddha's relics. Tohi, who was a little taken aback, said, 97. The price is still $1 million dollars. "Yes," said Mohammed, "no problem." "Okay, I will obtain it for you and call you when I have it," said the exited Tohi. Mohammed had obtained an ancient drawing of the box, so requested photographs first. Tohi put down the phone and shouted, "Damn!" The photograph that Mohammed had been given was of Dam, photographed entering * Angkor Wat, an ancient temple city in Cambodia, dressed in monk's robes, clutching a phony, homemade relic. Tohi thought it added a bit of mystery and intrigue to the setup, although he realized that Mohammed would have the means to find out more information about the real holy item. He received the call which confirmed Mohammed's eagerness to buy the artifact 3 weeks ago. Now, Tohi was only days away from adding more wealth to his already full pot, care of his friend, who was soon to be ex-friend. Damn. A tap on the door was Tohi's signal that Kip had arrived. With his quarry, he went to the door, and a happy Kip was stood outside with a small child, who appeared to be about 8 years old. The girl had been sobbing and her dirty tears had left black smudge marks around her cheeks. She wore a dirty faded floral dress. She looked up at the big Irish man as he opened the door. Gripped with fear, she started to sob again and was sharply checked by Kip, who squeezed her hand. "Good evening, Mr. Andrew, I trust she is okay for you." Tohi grabbed the girl and dragged her inside, closing the door, and instructed Kip to wait on the porch, and told him that he would receive a bonus tonight. Kip went over to a table and sat down, and lit a cigarette. The door opened again, and Tohi threw a packet of 5 King Edward cigars and a bottle of Samsung whiskey at Kip, which he struggled to catch. "Thank you, Mr. Andrew," Kip snivelled. 98. Tohi slammed the door shut, eager to get on with the night's proceedings. Tohi dragged the sobbing girl towards his bedroom. She was terrified, but noticed the safe. "Don't look, bitch," he snapped in Cambodian and pulled her into the bedroom. Aroused to bursting point, he pushed the youngster into the bathroom. "Shower," he snapped, and the girl ran into the shower room, locking the door behind her. Tohi was agitated. He undressed and got onto his bed, thinking of how he intended to push himself into the tight little orifice and thrust when the girl screamed. That was the part that he loved, the popping, and then the screaming. The more he thought, the more agitated he became. Hurry up, he yelled, "come on, or I'll break down the fucking door." The door slowly opened and the little girl came out. Come here now," growled Tohi. The terrified child moved slowly over toward Tohi, who leapt up and ripped her dress off, grabbed her arm and dragged her with him onto the bed. The little girl sobbed frantically, which excited Tohi even more. He put his hand between her legs and felt a warm liquid hit his hand. He looked down and saw a stream of urine coming from the frightened young girl. "Dirty little whore," yelled Tohi in his broad Irish accent, and threw her off the bed. "Clean it up and get back here." The girl ran back into the shower room and washed herself. While an angry, but still aroused, Tohi waited impatiently. He switched off the main light and turned on the bedside lamp. "Come here, come on," screamed Tohi. The door opened and the young girl walked nervously out of the bathroom. She glanced at Tohi and then looked over at the 99 figure now who's standing in the shadows at the door. Tohi noticed the girl and looked over in the same direction. "What the fuck? Kip, get out, you little fucker," hollered angry Tohi. The figure moved forward into the light. "Who the fuck are you?" Tohi yelled in English and then repeated in Cambodian. The figure wore the same monk's robe that Dam had made himself, complete with sword attached to a red sash. Who had changed outside earlier into his tinja robes, through Tohi the picture of Dam. "I am looking for this man, he has something that does not belong to him and I want it returned." Pon spoke in Cambodian. Slowly, so Tohi understood. "He isn't here, now get out." Pon looked at the girl and she ran to the monk and desperately held onto him. Please help me, holy monk, she pleaded, and the monk held her to him. Tohi, annoyed by this intrusion into his sordid world, leapt out of his bed and rushed at Pon. Pon turned around to shield the girl, removed his sword and sliced it across Tohi's throat in one smooth rapid movement. Tohi stopped, a shocked expression came over his face. Pon calmly turned his back on Tohi and left the room with the girl. Tohi fell to his knees and slumped forward, his head thumped loudly against the floor, followed a few seconds later by the rest of his torso. Pon had no remorse about killing, as he was trained not to have. Vichi and Samcha had told the monks, if the time comes, remember we are not the judges of these duties, that is between them and their god. We are only commissioned to arrange that appointment. 100. Pon had arranged 2 appointments that night. Tohi was only the second life he had ever taken. The first he now had over his shoulders and carried Kip's lifeless body, who he had dispatched with his Patu minutes before, to join Tohi's corpse. He laid Kip on top of Tohi and placed Tohi's head on the top, like a cherry on a cake. The little girl picked up Tohi's safe key, which had fallen off his neck, due to having no head to hold it in situ. She had opened the safe, her eyes widened as she took out bundles of crisp dole arbils, she explained to Pon, who looked for clues to the whereabouts of Dam, about money. It was only paper to him, but she explained what this paper could do. She had put back on her ripped dress. Pon turned to the now happy and relieved girl. You keep it, he said. She split the bundle. You take half, you will need it, holy monk, besides, and there is enough for me and my family to start a great new life. With this I can go home, my parents will be pleased, and let me stay, she said. A note of hope now in her voice. Pon thought and accepted. He knew if money had that kind of power, it would be more useful than his ornaments. He found a photograph in a frame on Tohi's desk, which allowed Dam going into Angkor Wat. Pon stared at the picture, then placed it in his rucksack. At least now, he had confirmation and was on the right track, but was disheartened his trail had now gone cold. Where would he find Dam and the holy relic? He had failed, and although there were many papers on Tohi's desk, he could not understand them. He would take them to Taksin's friend. He thought maybe he could help, but he still had one more task to complete. He went back into Tohi's bedroom and over to the 2 bodies.